time 7:34, may we come to order. First order of business is for me to offer apologies for being a little late this evening. The first order of business is approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as circulated?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Very good. Are there any changes, deletions? If none, then I'll ask for a vote for approval on the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
We have 3 items on the consent agenda, which can be adopted by simple motion to adopt the agenda. Do I hear such a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Otherwise minded? Very good. So that passes. So we've caught up a little of the time. Are there any presentations from residents, either in the building here or virtually?
Liz King has her hand up.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Liz King and I live, well, halfway down the sledding hill. And this is mainly to applaud and support everybody who is responsible for sledding having gone so well last week. For those that weren't around to see it, the sledding was popular. At times we had 20 people there and joyful. And whoever got the town crew to put up the no through street sign on Montrose and extra cones between Montrose and Argyle, I am sitting and telling you that I'm standing and applauding. I would like, though, for the council to bear in mind that on the second block down the hill, so there is an Argyle plowed lane on that second block, and it actually joins up to the plowed area on Montrose. And because of that, it is still quite possible for a kid to be sledding downhill while a car is going uphill with little or nothing in between them. So whoever it is that considers these issues on our town council, I would simply ask you to think about, is it possible for the Argyle plowed lane where the town policy says there's a pedestrian lane? Is it possible for that to stop before the plowed area on Montrose? And if it's not, could we please get something else as an additional barrier between the kids and the cars? I have nothing other than that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the 2022 policy, I think, is silent on how much of that narrow strip of Argyle is opened up. We can revisit it in terms of making it more precise, including the notion that if more of it needs to be plowed, the berm or other protection that is supplied between the sledding area and the plowed area could be greater. Is that what you're driving at?
That's certainly one way to do it. I realize that not everyone on Argyle would be happy about the idea of the pedestrian lane on Argyle remaining just for pedestrians. I'm quite sure that some of my neighbors fully consider that to be a driving lane, and therefore, would not be delighted if there were a division between what's supposed to be a pedestrian lane and Montrose. But if we can't do that, yes, having something like a berm in between, or, if it comes to it, 10 cones instead of 4. I am very appreciative that the cones got put back in places because it makes people get out of their cars and look at the kids before they go around the corner.
I know my daughter told me that people did go around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of cars that she saw, I'm sure there's probably more, but
Yep.
I went over and saw the kids sledding on the hill and it felt like a Norman Rockwell painting. It was just a joyous outpouring of youngsters and sleds and joy. So thank you.
Thanks. Anything further from residents? Who else do we have on there? All right. Well, hearing none, we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is confirmation of the town hall renovation plans coming out of the December meeting. Barb, do you want to start us on
Sure,
that?
I'll just make some opening comments, and then we're joined tonight by Greg Wiedemann. As you all know, you had a special town council meeting on December 18th to discuss in part the renovation of Town Hall. There was certain direction given to Wiedemann Architects in terms of the building program that you wanted to see for the next iteration of the renovation plan. Included in your agenda packet are two alternatives that Wiedemann Architects has developed for your review and discussion tonight. We're referring to those now as options 5A and 5B. Also included in your agenda packet is a letter from Mr. Wiedemann dated January 6th, in which he outlines the proposed scope of services for the design development phase. He is looking this evening for feedback on 5A and 5B, which he'll provide highlights of momentarily, and also just confirmation of the proposed scope of work for the next phase of design, on which his fee proposal will be based. So we want to make sure everyone's in agreement about that. With that, Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Members of the council, as Barbara said, on the 18th of December, certain comments regarding option 4 were expressed. And I itemized that at the beginning part of what is called attachment 3. The main points were that the accessory room or ancillary room at the rear of the town hall should be larger than previously shown, ideally in the 375 to 400 square foot range. We have done that in both options 5A and 5B. There was also the desire to have about 150 square feet of storage within the footprint of the building. Again, we have provided that in both of the options that we're presenting to you tonight. Certain things were agreed upon, such as that the building would be protected by an automatic sprinkler system, that provision for solar panels and emergency generators will not be part of the initial scope and will be considered at a later time, and that the secondary ramp in the back is something that could be eliminated, since the consensus was that the front and the back of the building would likely be used by a single user primarily. So before you are two options. Option 5A and 5B have similar footprints. They both extend the room in the back toward the rear yard, toward the west, and extend the patio further west. So the primary differences between A and B are the way the roof is handled. In A, there is a cross gable facing the rear yard. And by doing so, we're able to maintain a very tall ceiling, a 12-foot ceiling in that area. The second option, 5B, treats the extension more like a porch, and which diminishes the scale as it moves toward the backyard. But with that, in order to have a consistent ceiling in the rear room. That rear room would have a 9-foot ceiling, which is similar to the current condition. And by having that lower ceiling, we could also have the ability to have standing room in the center of the walkthrough on the upstairs storage area. So those are the two primary differences between the two schemes. And what we've presented is a site plan showing the extension. We're showing the elimination of the ramp, and we're reducing the amount of paving slightly around the building. And then we've provided elevations of how it would look from each vantage point and a cross-section through each.
Can I
I'm
ask a quick
open
question?
to any questions about the two or anything that I just summarized in terms of the assumptions about option 5.
So I'd like to ask a question. So my understanding is that 5B would be more cost effective than 5A. It would save money in the construction cost. Is that correct?
Possibly nominally. The way it's depicted, we thought aesthetically it might look best if there were more windows in B. So it did appear more like a porch. So it might be a wash between the two.
Okay, thank you.
So what we're doing is authorizing the procedure to look at both of these, is that right? Or we're
I
not
think the recommendation is that we pick one
Right.
right now?
to
I
move
think-
forward with.
Correct.
Okay.
Because there's a cost to continuing to
Right.
entertain multiple different.
We don't have cost estimates.
No.
They will be refined, but it would be helpful to have a direction.
Like Greg was saying, it's really like the cost between the two would be about the same.
But we could add windows to the 5A if we wanted to also, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I
Because the
would not.
windows look nice.
Mhm.
And I had a couple other minor things that have to do with probably both of them. And the first one is I noticed in the storage, and I'm looking at A 1.1. I happen to just pick 5B, but it could be either one, I believe. And looking in the lower left corner, there I see the attic hatch, the hatch for the crawl space, but there's a box in the corner there, and I'm not really sure what that is. It's unlabeled. It's just like a
In the attic plan,
no, this is on 1.1, A 1.1 on 5B. And it's the floor plan and it shows a storage closet. And there's a random box kind of in the corner and I don't know quite what it is.
In the southwest corner.
Yeah, okay, southwest will work for me.
Is that just exemplary storage?
Well, it would be storage. That's still just diagrammatic, basically, that within the storage room, there would be additional shelving presumably, or, right, so, and the hatch might go over to the left side and the closet might be built in behind one of the tall cabinets, so.
The second thing I had was to remove the tall cabinets in front of there and make that at least a good 6 foot wide because we could put rolling racks in there. Rolling storage that would allow multiple storage areas, individualized storage areas.
Okay. I'm sorry, to understand your comment, would you be moving the wall that separates the storage room from the auxiliary room
towards the center.
northerly and have the spaces that are devoted to tall cabinets within the storage?
Yes, that's what I'm proposing.
Uh-huh. That would be fine.
And the other thing that I thought was really cool was that you had, regardless of which way it works out, I like the, by the windows, regardless of what we're doing with the windows, the counter with storage underneath,
Yes,
I thought was a great idea.
great.
Um,
We also introduced a tall cabinet in what we're calling the rear hall. Thinking that you'd have the serving counter, but then you could also gain some significant storage in that area as well.
Well, I'm wondering, couldn't we just put a serving counter, and I'm looking in that serving area in the hall,
Yes,
instead of doing a tall cabinet, of doing overhead, and again, everybody, I'm on 5.1.1, looking at the top, towards the top, right, almost in the center where it's got tall cabinet, and that's across from a counter, and I'm wondering, couldn't we make another counter over there? Because I noticed when we've been doing a couple of functions I've attended, we always seem to want to have 2 serving lines. And the ability to have another serving
Sure.
area. And if we did cabinets above, cabinets below, then we would not lose a ton of space.
right. Sure, yeah.
I had a couple residents ask me about taking the wall out between the warming kitchen and the auxiliary room so that the counter cabinet area could be open so that we're not, I went over to the Bannockburn rec center community space and they did a warming kitchen and it's all open and it worked really well for an event I was at. So I don't know if you want to consider that, but to take the wall out or part of that wall so that the kitchen and the auxiliary room would be more open was a suggestion that I heard from a couple people.
Like a pass-through.
Could even be a doorway, maybe that has a pocket door or a door that folds open.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That might allow us to have something like when we have high occupancy events that are more like a potluck style, you might have, 20, 30, 40 different dishes all strewn about. That it might help us to have that as an option where you could go through the main door of the kitchen and then hang a left and then go out into the other room, kind of like loop around.
Uh-huh.
I
think that's a good suggestion, more flexible.
Or I'm talking about taking the wall out between the refrigerator and the beginning and the end of that and the pantry, I guess.
Yes.
So that would all be open to the auxiliary area. Because we can't close the door between the warming kitchen and the rear hall anyways, it looks like. So anyways, it was just a thought.
You can, I mean, the idea of a pocket door sounds pretty cool because in that way you could close it.
Open it or close it.
Right. I
Yeah.
think that's very good.
Okay. Well, just to try to open it up a little more, like.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That makes perfect sense to me. I had one another thing just had to do with, if you look at, and I'm going on A 1.0, which is basically like the basement or crawl space.
Yes.
Is it possible, and I don't know if this is already pre-existing, to move that sump that's in the far corner of the existing building all the way towards the hatch, and the same with the other one?
Uh-huh. Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just for some poor service person, they have to get down in there and crawl to it.
Yes.
And if it's possible to do the same thing, move closer. I mean, it's reasonably close, but to move closer for the one that's underneath the new addition.
Yes, I don't see any problem with that at all.
And then the other thing I had with that, is it possible to make it so that there's a 3-foot clearance between the lowest beam in the crawl space to the mud slab? I'm thinking of service people who have to come in there. I've worked in plenty of tight spaces and it's not fun.
Sure.
The old one, but the new one, I'm sorry, the new one, not the old one, because the old one we can't do anything about, but the new one, if we could go down like a foot, that would allow us, anybody else to get in there, the ability to at least crawl around without banging into the
Sure.
joist stuff.
Sure, sure.
And then the other thing, which I know is on the list, you talked about, but I assume we're putting the electric box is going to be in the front, I guess we'll call it parlor room,
Where it is now.
where it is essentially where it is now.
It's drawn on there.
Well,
Right.
we were trying to minimize cost of rewiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's,
So we're rotating it somehow into that corner.
yeah.
I don't know, we'd have to study that in more detail, but that was the motivation. I would say ideally it would be, in the storage room or some other location, but that was the motivation.
Okay. If that's the case, then just to include, I know I've spoken about it before, the conduit to run from that area over to the opposite corner in case we put a generator in at some point.
Yes,
And I'd probably put in two conduits, a bigger one for the power wires and a smaller one for the control wires.
okay. Uh-huh.
Wouldn't the generator be outside?
Well, yes, it'd be outside, but we're gonna, the
Have
Have
thought
to
was,
connect it to the electrical panel, yeah.
right, you have to connect it to the electric panels, transfer switch, blah, blah.
Right. Those are all very good suggestions.
Do we
Great,
have a
thanks.
consensus for A or B? Since cost seems to be not a significant factor.
Just from an aesthetic standpoint, I prefer A with the gable. I think the chunky, chunky look, I'll say, of the back roof line in B is to me unattractive. It also, from a storage standpoint, that's a better option. The higher ceiling,
Yeah.
or not storage. Functionality.
But I think someone observed earlier that from an aesthetic standpoint, the windows on the north and south sides of the projection of the auxiliary room are also attractive. And I believe, Greg, you indicated those could be worked into option A as well.
Was that a question for me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Well, from a certain standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, the windows on the north and south sides of the projection of the auxiliary room that is shown in option B
Yes,
are attractive, and I believe you indicated earlier that they or something like them could be incorporated in option A as well.
that's correct. That's correct. I would say the primary difference is the 12'9" ceiling in A and the 9'6" ceiling in B. And the ability to walk more comfortably through the attic space with the lower ceiling of B.
With the lower ceiling of B also, I mean, over time, there would be some energy savings, right? Some. Would those be something to think about or not?
Zero, but probably not.
Not worth-
Not like it wouldn't be a decision leader.
Sure.
No,
Okay.
you said in A, or I'm sorry, in B, we'd get more clearance.
Because the ceiling of the accessory room is lower
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
By
Yeah, yeah,
three-
yeah.
by 3 feet. You gain that headroom. So it's easier to walk through. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to actually get access all the way through to the attic of the original chapel, the main room. So you don't, I know people are not thrilled about this pull-down stair, but there are better ones. And it would be a lot easier than going up that hatch. So,
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you can line it up with the door in that room, you could,
yes,
it would be pretty friendly stair for staff to use. It wouldn't really be for residents, but I think I would agree with you, Greg. That's a pretty compelling reason for
yeah,
the upside for B. Like, I wonder if maybe to alleviate Jerry Lee's concern on B with, like, the porch star part does look a little bit tacked on. I wonder if maybe that could be just roofed differently.
uh-huh,
Maybe it's one thing, maybe that it's a smaller cross gable just over that porch area, doesn't have to be as tall, doesn't even, kind of like the existing front addition, it doesn't necessarily have to have the same pitch. But maybe
Uh-huh.
that kind of tied in differently, at least, and maybe better, then that would allow keeping that attic to be a little bit more regularized and useful. And I want
Uh-huh.
to be like 12'9" seems like overkill for that size room in the back.
Yeah.
6 seems pretty good. I wonder if maybe like a middle ground, like 10 feet for the back could be doable, kind of just go up a little bit. And I think you got like 7'6" in the attic, maybe that could just be 7 feet. I wonder if there's, maybe just a couple inches, kind of almost just adjusting that one both ways. Maybe that would be a way to kind of.
Well, the current rear hall is shown at 9.6. So in B, we're continuing that ceiling height through the room. And I was thinking 9.6 was adequate for a room of that scale. I agree with you.
Yeah, it seems like a good volume. So.
And
It seems to me that for the rarity of when you're actually going to be accessing that attic room, you're giving up a pretty major aesthetic.
I would agree.
yes,
From where?
Go ahead.
How often would the maintenance team even be accessing the attic? Not very often. So we're making a pretty major change to allow,
Yeah. I kind of see it more.
access comfort.
I see it more in
Or,
balance.
the view of the back of it is going to be seen every day.
Right.
I don't think people really go back there that often.
Well, they'll
Sounds
see
like
it if
it's
they're
over.
driving on the Blue Cross property.
Yeah,
A
and
little
I
bit.
think they go however often, it's far more than the maintenance staff will need to get access to the attic.
I mean, the difference is that with the attic is that you'd have to go up a set of stairs, as I understand. Whereas on A, whereas in B, and by the way, I'm looking at 3.2, A3.2 for both of these. I assume that's where we're
That's correct.
talking. And so if I look at the north-south building section, which is the one on the right, I see a set of stairs you'd have to go up. Whereas it'd be flat as soon as you open that hatch to go across. But to me, I don't think it would be a really big issue.
Looks like you're gonna have to like kind of crawl up those steps to get through.
Crawl them?
Yeah.
How so?
Is that section drawn like through the ridge line of the center part, or is that?
the section on the right is cut through the linking roof. And that is a tight squeeze to get through to the
Front attic storage.
front attic storage.
These
I
two.
think if you,
And what's expected to be in the front attic storage?
I would just air handler, right? Just maintenance.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What would actually be inside the front attic storage?
Well, it's mainly to get to the air conditioning units and servicing and things like that. I mean, I wouldn't think that would be
Okay,
needed for storage, but it's
that's
up
what
to
I
you.
thought. I just wanted to verify that.
Yeah,
We're not talking about something that people would be accessing to.
no.
No.
But the rear attic storage is more comfortable in B, in the addition. That's all I was pointing out.
What's the ceiling height in the room we're in right now?
That's 12.9.
And so we're proposing 12 in A, the back room would be 12.2, did you say?
In A, it would be the same height as the parlor, yeah.
12.6.
I mean, it really makes a difference, especially when you're in a public setting, a public room with a crowd, to have a lower ceiling. Your perception of the feeling of closure. Closeness.
Better to have a higher ceiling or?
I think it's better to have a higher ceiling.
Yes, I would
It
think.
is for the right size room, but I think, I'm not sure that 400 square feet really matches it up with a 12.9. Or it's not really necessary. And I'm kind of not real keen on the way, on 2.2, the way the side of that cross gable in the back looks. I think it looks fine from the rear, looking straight on, but it looks really clunky from the other side.
And we could add windows
Yeah.
to that one as well, you know.
Understood, but I guess I'm really thinking more like the scale of that roof. It just seems really, it gets really large over there. So I think.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be perceived a lot bigger from that side and kind of obliquely. I would still very strongly suggest something, you know, either a little bit higher than 9.6 or sticking at 9.6.
Yeah.
I feel like 12.9 is overkill and it makes that whole roof go up so high and gets pretty bulky. And just because the porch type 1 is shown the way it is with that like kind of shed gable doesn't mean it has to be that way.
This you're talking about?
You know, more of this,
Yeah.
yeah. So that, you know, the top of that porch could be something I would think a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily have to go all the way up to the other ridge. Kind of perhaps bring down that massing of what is in.
Right.
Yeah, so I have major concerns with the massing on.
So would
A, so.
you think that on A, if you made it roughly the same height as I'll call it the linking side then?
The roof or the?
The roof height.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to prescribe it.
No,
We've been could.
lower
take
it down.
Kind of just thinking about it as. I've had that project on many challenges where it went through a public review and got asked to raise or lower a roof. So it's just something you gotta figure out with that.
So Stephen, you're
With the scale.
talking about the interior massing as opposed to how it's from the exterior?
No, I'm talking about the exterior on, going back and forth between pages.
Or
If you look at
Or
A
2.1.
3.1, option 5B, it shows the 9'6" rear hall, the 9'6" assembly room, and there's about 7'4" clear walking through the center of the attic. So it's and the stair would not have to be as long by virtue of having a lower attic floor.
It wouldn't be a cathedral. It wouldn't be a cathedral up there. It would be something maybe at best it would be 7.6 and it would slope down both sides. So it's not like somebody would be able to do a ton with it, but lightweight storage and maintenance stuff could be.
Yeah.
There. Neither of these has any potential to be a public, like a resident access space.
Right.
But to answer your question, Jerry, it's the part that concerns me is on option 5A 2.2. It's this roof out over to the left here. It's just trying to match all the heights of the existing. I guess we'd call it the parlor that's over here in this room. Matching the heights, it makes it pretty tall in the back and pretty chunky. I think the scale of it just gets a little challenged.
Well, if we do,
Size of that
Is
plan.
at the front?
Which, that's not A22.
Yeah. I feel like trying to get
So you're suggesting to lower it at the front?
in the back.
In the back.
Not go up to 12'9", but go 9'6", 10 foot, 10'6", somewhere in that range where it's a nice house, a nice healthy size and scale for that room, but not doing 12'9", which just for the sake of matching this room.
from looking at A 3.15B, I'm assuming that the picture rail or whatever you want to call that intermediate border that's above us is roughly 9'6". So that would roughly be the ceiling height, the top of the windows, Basically, it runs along the top of the windows there.
Yes, yeah,
That should be
a little
roughly.
bit higher than that, yeah.
And I would also just throwing it out there, just thinking about it as a public function, I think it would. Think back to originally this room was proposed by me, this as an add-on room, kind of accessory to the main space, but not to be like the main public space. Like this room would still stay the big public space. So where if we're trying to corral costs and do something that's kind of a nice scale fitting in with the existing building. It's two different reasons I think I would be cautioned against going up to 12.9 in the back room.
So just to clarify, it sounds like there's more support for 5B except for this roof issue. Is that correct?
5A.
I might be the only person that's more in favor of 5B,
Oh, I'm sorry, 5A.
but I'm not sure if anybody else is applying that. I think Jerry Lee applied on 5A, and I think I applied on 5B, but I'm not sure if anybody else did.
I like 5A with the windows added.
I think I would be okay with a hybrid between the two, like if that back gable was lower, then the ceiling was lower, but I can't support 12.9, the ceiling back there, and it's such, and all the mass that entails.
Well, certain,
The lower ceiling in 5B is a lot more sense.
I agree.
You get up to 10, that would be fine, but just in sort of in general, I don't think we need the height shown in 5A.
I agree.
I'm fine with that. And if you
If
do,
you find something in between, that would be good. My larger concern is the gable and also not going all the way down to the 9-foot.
not going down to 9'6",
Right.
you want to keep it above that? Okay.
Yeah, something above that, but also the rear view is really pretty unattractive with 5 feet.
I'll sketch it on here, Jeremy, and probably poorly trying to explain. Bringing it down to the blue lines. Still having a triangular cross gable in the back, but kind of scaling it down, not necessarily having to follow the same pitch. That way it just doesn't look as bulky.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that's something like that were possible, that would be better than what you see of 5 feet in.
I think it's the kind of the straight
two-
across roof
two,
is,
yeah.
Little bulky.
that's the thing that we're reacting to.
So A, with those revisions, that sounds good. I'm in favor of the lower ceiling as well. I guess.
It would be essentially B. With the,
Exterior bay.
Yeah.
Closer to the exterior bay.
We can study the roof at the back. I think if I guess it would be helpful to know whether a ceiling in the 9'6" to 10-foot range is preferred to the 12'9" or not.
I think the consensus is it is. Yes,
yes.
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 Lower
Okay, all right.
And windows in the 5B, the windows from 5B, I think that's what we like if it's A or B
Okay, okay,
in the auxiliary
But
room.
with some sort of gabling.
yes, okay. So,
And
I
if
would
you
say
could
that-
go higher than 9'6", that would be nice.
Nice even 10 maybe. But it seems like that's well received, right? The idea like that part that shuts out, that windows on 3 sides kind of feels like a sunroom.
Yes.
A little bit more,
Yep.
okay,
like a sunroom pop out.
all right.
It's nice.
And
Yeah, I mean, we can study the roof in that area.
less mass on the back.
All right.
Okay,
Do you have enough guidance? from-
yes, yes.
Do you want to take a?
I'm assuming that the comments that were shared about the tall cabinets in the accessory room be oriented into the storage room, and that the tall cabinet in the rear hall be changed to a counter with upper cabinets. So there's 2 serving surfaces. That a door be added between the warming kitchen, perhaps a pocket door.
Right.
And the sumps near the hatches, and the conduit between the electric and the future generator, and 3-foot clear in the crawl space.
in the,
Yep.
new
All right,
addition.
if that's the consensus, that's all we need. And the other part of the discussion is just an understanding about the scope of work that we're going to be undertaking in what we're calling the design development stage. And I itemized that in the letter. Broadly speaking, at this stage, we bring in the consultants. We would have a geotech engineer look at the soil conditions and some of the drainage issues in the rear yard. We'd have a structural engineer create basic framing. The mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers would have conceptual drawings, about 50% complete construction drawings for MEP. The civil would do a concept for the stormwater management and develop drawings for the fire department and mandatory referral. And we would use the drawings to get a conceptual approval from HPC. And if possible, we would submit it to MHT for comment. We would also meet with the Department of Permitting Services to make sure that no code modifications or variances would be required. And we're not anticipating any at the county level. We are anticipating that the lot coverage will exceed the Garrett Park lot coverage, but not the county lot coverage.
Where you have, Greg, that the plans would be used for, would not be used for construction, would they be appropriate to be used for preliminary pricing from a subcontractor and subs?
Yes,
So
yes.
can we add that in your letter
Well,
under whatever this is? It is
right.
understood that
What
they
the difficulty there is how what flexibility the town has to obtain preliminary pricing.
Right.
And I just don't know from a legal point of view. I know in the private world, we definitely would take the opportunity at that stage to obtain some estimates from general contractors.
Right.
Greg, if I may, I did have the opportunity to discuss this issue with the town attorney. Didn't have a chance to get back to you. I think our collective preference would probably be to go to the third-party cost estimator.
Okay.
I think the duration of this project and everyone's knowledge of it could make it very challenging to ensure that there's an equal playing field when this finally goes out for bidding for construction.
Okay.
purposes.
Okay. All right. All right. I'll see what I can do in terms of finding a appropriate cost estimator for that stage. I know we're working on the Noyes Children's Library in Kensington at the moment, and that particular cost estimator was not interested in bidding or preparing the cost estimate for this. So,
Greg, I have a name that I can pass on to you.
oh, wonderful. Great. Terrific. Yeah, so that's the scope of what we would be doing in this next phase. And I would imagine it would extend to the early part of the summer.
And I just thought of another question. Where will the sprinkler, in a commercial building be a riser room, but the
Yeah, I
sprinkler
know.
stuff
Yeah,
be?
that's a very good point. It occurred to us too. We're gonna need to find a place for that, so we'll have to
We're
do
gonna
that.
have to have a tank of water.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. So there would be a closet essentially that would be needed for that purpose. We'll have to look at that.
We would need to be that large for this building though, right?
No, that's
Just a
right.
couple of square feet plan.
Right.
Perhaps it could be that the janitor's closet would get a little larger and it would be accommodated there. I don't know. We'll have to explore that further.
Okay.
Okay.
Just if it's helpful, like during planning, like you've probably heard from us a couple times about like laying out food and tables and cabinets, but I was just trying to estimate in my head, like usually our worst, like our highest case use for putting that out, it's really like potluck dinners, and I think it's probably like maybe 3-4 table lengths in length that we kind of get by with, so maybe that's like what is that, like 8 times 4, so probably like 30-ish. That sounds right to everyone else, 30-ish square or 30-ish
Running
square
feet, yeah.
space, but that wouldn't have to be all like permanent counters. It might be like if if the layout kind of lends itself to bringing out tables and arranging them in a way that kind of gets that to work, then that might be kind of the way to think about it, like a mixture of permanent counters for small events with like sensible places to bring out tables for the larger ones.
Okay, okay.
So just one additional minor point, given that square footage in the storage closet, storage area will be at a premium, would a pocket door between that and the janitor closet make any sense? Are there lockable?
Yes.
Anything further? Just a question I had, is everyone okay with the idea of putting the piano over the
In the
baby
front.
baby in that corner over there? That's where its suggestion was,
Yeah.
over underneath the occupancy
I'm
sensor.
making the assumption that that was just showing an option.
Yeah, that's,
I guess more generally in this room.
yes.
Either in this room or next door.
Okay.
All right,
Okay,
good. Thank you
Okay.
for the quick turnaround.
thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you.
I know.
That brings us to the manager's report.
Thank you. Included in your agenda packet is the financial report for the month of December. Just as a reminder, we're now at that mark, the 50% halfway point in fiscal year 2025. What I tried to do in the staff memo was just sort of recap some things that I thought might be of interest to you. Some of this information has been shared in prior reports, but not in this comprehensive fashion. So just as a reminder, the amount of the prior year carryover exceeded the budgeted amount by $136,455. Just wanted to reassure you in terms of local income tax revenue. This was a comment last month's report. The decline was expected and considered during the development of the FY 2025 budget. As you know, we've talked about extensively, the pandemic threw off some of the normal timelines, filing deadlines, and enforcement issues that greatly impact income tax revenue. So we did get an unusually high payment in November of 2023 that sort of skewed things in FY 2024. The next bullet item is more of kind of a heads up. So budgeted revenues for account 3.1 includes anticipated reimbursement for 2 grant-funded projects. Those were Yenville Park and the renovation of Town Hall. I think just that the timing of these projects will likely impact those revenues. I just need the time to step back and kind of look at that. So I will be bringing forward a budget adjustment most likely in February, and you'll see some changes both on the expenditure flow for those projects as well as the reimbursements from the state. Account Count 3.2, which is from Montgomery County, as I shared probably about 5 months ago, through the efforts of County Councilmember Kate Stewart, now County Council President. We had worked with her office to advocate for a county tax duplication payment for park maintenance. That's been a multi-year effort during my tenure here. And there's a larger issue to be worked out between the county and the municipalities, but Councilmember Stewart did advocate on the town's behalf. And after we had adopted our budget, we found out that we'd get approximately $30,000 more in tax duplication payments from the county than was actually budgeted through her efforts. This is a one-time payment. What the county budget office and the county executive's office are doing now is trying to actually go back and work with Montgomery Parks to actually come up with a set formula for park maintenance. The amounts that several of the municipalities are having were established in the 1980s. No one knows anymore what the basis of those payments were, if it was ever defined, and they've just been adjusted by inflation. So that's been kind of the holdup. The county's not sure what to do with our request. Investment revenues, as I mentioned, as of December 31, may have looked a little low compared to FY 2024. We have a significant amount of our portfolio with the Montgomery County Investment Pool. Actually, during this meeting, I got a note from our contact there providing the interest earnings for the quarter that ended December 31st. It's roughly 17,200 from the county investment pool for the quarter. And then we also received in today's mail the investment report from M&T Advisors, and that's about 5,000. So roughly we're running just about even with where we were last year. And investment revenues and interest rates are actually working in the town's favor. As you all likely recall, account 5.2.2, which is Penn Place rents. At the time we finalized our FY 2025 budget, we had not reached agreement with In the Kitchen doing business at Black Market on the new lease terms. Shortly after the budget was adopted, we did finalize that lease. So a future budget amendment will recognize the additional lease revenue of approximately $52,000 that we'll receive in FY 2025 that was not accounted for in the budgeted amount. On the expense side, just a reminder, many of our operational expenses are not evenly distributed through the year. So the targets that are included in the report truthfully don't necessarily have a lot of meaning when it comes to the expenditure side. Our year-to-date expenses are in line with the budgeted amounts as of now. So before I move on, are there any questions about the financial report? Anyone? If not, in terms of our ARPA funding status, we did fully obligate our ARPA funding as of the December 31st, 2024 Treasury deadline. One of the things I need to figure out before the budget adjustment comes forward is there are a few lingering items that may impact where projects get charged. As I've advised, our contractor for the road and sidewalk improvements project did miss the contractual deadline. They also have a legitimate claim for some change order work, and they submitted that change order. So I just need to sit down with the project manager and talk through those issues and figure out where we end up. Any questions about the ARPA funding? Okay.
So we made it.
We made it.
Yeah, that's-
Congratulations, well done.
Yay.
Yeah. The Waverly lighting was by the hair of our chinny chin chin. That contract was signed December 23rd. And thanks to our partners at Traffic Systems, who were actually already closed down for the holidays and did log back on to actually sign that contract, for which I was immensely grateful.
Thank you.
On Wednesday, January 22nd, we will have our second community meeting regarding the design of the future Yendel Park, which, as you all know, is at 11321 Kenilworth Avenue. That community meeting will get underway at 7 p.m. As you all may recall, Norton Land Design is by contract preparing 3 concept designs, which they will be unveiling on January 22nd. They will have a kind of a brief presentation, just sort of framing what were the factors they considered when developing the 3 concept designs. That will be a brief presentation. The format of this will be a little different than the first community meeting. There will actually be presentation boards for each of the 3 concept designs. Residents will be able just to sort of walk through, take as much time as they want to look at each of the 3 concept designs. And we'll have the opportunity to fill out a comment card providing their feedback, whether there's a strong preference for one they absolutely hate, or just if there's elements of each. So it'll be a little bit more open-ended in terms of how that meeting will be structured.
Will there be a tally? By the town staff or?
Yeah, we'll basically take all the comment cards and probably keep copies in our office, but also make copies for Norton. We do recognize that oftentimes, particularly our residents who have young children, who have school events or things like that, who may not be able to attend that night. We will probably take the presentation boards with us at the conclusion of that meeting and either have them set up, we need to just kind of look at space, either have them set up in the lobby of the 3rd floor or have them set up in the lobby of the post office, so that anyone who couldn't attend that meeting will still have the same opportunity to review them. We're either going to possibly film on one of our phones the opening comments and have that available on the website, or have some sort of handout basically describing things.
We can't have the meeting online.
I
the
think it,
annual meeting, because I'm gonna be out of town.
we can probably, at least we'll have in some manner film the opening part of the presentation. So that will be available. But I think, with part of the meeting, people will just sort of be going through at their own pace, looking at the 3 concept designs. The Norton staff will be on hand. There's not much point in filming that because there's going to be more kind of one-on-one interactions and people just
Okay.
asking questions. But we can certainly film the part that we can, Lisa.
That would be great. Thank you.
Don't the meetings go sort of better in terms of information flow and discussion if there's some sort of comparison explicitly of the 3?
There will be. What we, the mayor, Kayla, and I had a meeting last week. It seems like it's been longer. With Norton, they're still refining the 3 concept designs. We're either going to have them, there's only so much you can sort of get on a presentation board, but we're trying to ask them to kind of have a tagline or something that is a short descriptor of each of the 3. We still have some details to work out since the meeting. 10 days may not seem like much, but it is on a project like this. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on their part.
Not a convening at the end of the meeting to sort of
No.
come to a consensus? Or
No,
discuss?
because we still want to have the opportunity to basically have feedback from those who couldn't attend the meeting. We also I've sometimes found that people are more comfortable sort of writing their comments down just based on interactions we've had with residents, where they can just sort of share their own opinion without having to kind of do it in front of other people and things like that. So we're going to try a different approach and try to avoid the survey. I know the surveys have been of some concern to some of you here and to some of our residents. So there will be kind of a regrouping after we have a chance to look at everything with Norton. Their contract did contemplate, because this is part of the RFP, that there might end up being a 4th concept design as kind of your interactive processes happen with town hall. Things sort of evolve on time in time. So we'll see if there's kind of a clear preference that comes out of that from the feedback we get. But Norton is contracted to possibly prepare a design that picks up elements of each of the 3 as well. So Kayla earlier today did send out something on the listservs, and there was also something in the Bugle about the state. You may recall that we did have some signs we used for the first community meeting in Yendel that we sort of put up around town. We will be retrofitting those signs to basically have the new date and also be Jeanette. Yes, Jeanette has the best handwriting, so it will be hers. You've seen, not mine or not Kayla's, because it would be illegible. Speaking of the listservs, I did just want to kind of bring you up to speed that over the last 6 months, we have experienced some Google-related issues, which, based on my time on the user forums, are not unique to Garrett Park. Jeanette started in January, had no problem whatsoever adding her as one of the group owners on behalf of the town. When the mayor took office in May, we attempted to add him, and Google isn't having the garrettparkmd.gov address in any way, shape, or form. The difficulty in adding non-Google addresses apparently is something that I've seen in some of the Google user forums that other people are reporting challenges with. I went to post something, I guess it was about last week, was a kind of an eye-opener. Kayla basically brought up something that had been posted to one of the listservs. I hadn't received anything. So that was the first indication that I was no longer receiving anything that's posted to the listserv. I just need to go on and log into Google. They're not coming directly into my inbox. I then went to send a post last week only to find that Google told me that my account has been disabled, even though when you look into Google, I'm still a member and I'm still an owner. So we are going to start exploring some other options. It's not clear the extent of the issues, but I think we do need to at least start talking to some of our peer communities and find out how they're communicating with their residents. Because we're not sure if the problems that I'm now experiencing are going to then move to Kayla or to Jeanette, in which case we're dead in the water in terms of posting. But this is more just kind of a heads up of some of the issues we've been dealing with and why you will see Kayla's name very prominently posting because I no longer can. And I think just lastly, just want to give a shout out to our maintenance team. Obviously, this was not Snowmageddon, but it's the most significant snowstorm we've had in the last couple years. And as always, our maintenance team did a great job in clearing town streets and just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. So unless there's any questions, that concludes my report.
On the Google groups you're talking about, is that the town, quote unquote, town forum, or is that?
It's both the
GPML?
town forum and GPML, it's both of them.
I did have a question. I noticed that I think Kayla shared with us based on a resident inquiry, an exchange with a resident who had not adequately cleared the sidewalk adjacent to their property. And I wondered if the town office was making a routine to communicate with residents who are not clearing the snow from adjacent to their property, or if that was only because the resident complained.
We do if we're aware of it. Oftentimes our residents are also just sort of a great set of eyes to alert us to any issues. In this particular case, when we went through and we obviously put information in the Bugle, and also Kayla has done a great job of, as snow was forecasted, putting things out on the listservs. What we found with this particular resident is that the email address that was entered into Google Groups for them was not actually the email address they use. So that's been since updated. So I think they were also very eager to resolve the issue.
Thanks. I appreciate the increased communication. I think it's good.
And just to add, the staff did a great job.
Thank you. I'll pass that on.
Especially given the fact that they were up at dark 30, because I know I saw them out there. So, yeah, exactly. Because I saw them go by about 3:30. I
Yeah,
thought it was
they,
great.
Two of them reported in a couple hours before midnight. The other person reported at midnight, and basically they were working essentially 24 hours, except for catching a couple hours of sleep, sleeping on the floor in some cases. So we're very fortunate to have the dedicated staff that we have.
Yep.
Kayla, would you mind if we flip the next two items?
I have no objection, just that there you'd like the pool wall to come forward.
Yeah, we have people who are waiting, and we can dispense with it fairly quickly, I think. This has to do with the repair of the remnant of foundation wall for the B&O water tank that is on the town property that's leased to the pool and has been the subject of some discussion for some period of time. In November, members of the town council and the pool board and others met at the site and looked at it and felt that the repairs and changes could be accomplished a little more simply by simply removing the top couple of courses of bricks, which appear to have been added to the original foundation wall anyway, and are causing the current concern. Replace it with a much thinner cap, and then regrade the ground behind it to the resultant height of the remaining foundation wall. That, perhaps with the addition of a few inches of soil to the planting bed at the base of the foundation wall, should reduce the height, top to bottom, to less than 30 inches, which is the requirement for a railing. This obviously could not be accomplished before the pool opens this May. So we will, and the original funding was conceived to be from ARPA funds. So there is no earmarked money in the current budget. Between those two factors, we're going to propose that we get an informal notion of the approximate cost of the scaled back approach and consider it in our budget session for FY26, because the work would not begin there until the fall of this year. Is there anyone who wishes to address that issue? Donna? Anyone else?
I just have a question on it. So we'll have what, about 30 inches of exposed wall then?
That would be the aim, yes.
Okay, so it's
Maximum.
So we don't have to have a railing.
right. No, I knew that. So we have to have a railing. So it'll be, and then it'll be more or less the same length.
Yes, we would also explore the need, if any, for small supporting elements at the far right and left sides.
It makes sense.
Yeah, the consensus seems to be that the original foundation wall is sound. So a full-scale new retaining wall is simply not necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then would we, at some point, put up some type of plaque or something else?
Yeah,
That's down the
we
road.
could
Yeah,
put that in the hands of the Historic Preservation Committee.
Diagrammatically, it should be very similar to what's there now, just tidy it up a lot and
Yes.
have that cap kind of tie everything down a lot better. That seems to be what's falling apart is the added brick.
You need a motion?
No, it's just a FYI.
Seems like a great solution.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we did have money that was earmarked for it, but it was in ARPA, so therefore it's no longer in the budget. Is that what's,
The funds were not obligated by December 31st.
okay, so it was basically taken out of
We already
budget.
spent it for other things.
Right.
things, right?
Yeah, so you'll just need to identify funding, as the mayor indicated, during the FY 2026 budget and just appropriate it in the regular capital budget. The non-ARPA budget is essentially closed.
Right.
I mean, the ARPA budget is closed.
All right, that brings us to updating the town's procurement procedure. Kayla.
Thank you all. If you can cast your mind back approximately 4 weeks, we had a pretty robust discussion about a proposed draft ordinance that would codify the town's procurement requirements. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. We had quite a few things to talk through, and several modifications and additions were identified that evening. In the staff memo for this agenda item, you can see listed in bullet points all of the modifications that emerged from that meeting. I do want to particularly draw your attention to Article 2, Section 4, which governs professional services. The conversation on the evening of December 9th was focused heavily on wanting to add some more rigid requirements, including specifying a threshold at which the services must be bid out in order to create greater transparency and accountability. There is now draft language included in the updated copy of the proposed ordinance. It is highlighted in yellow to make it easy for you all to find. I am going to just read it aloud so that those who don't have a copy of the draft ordinance with them or those who are joining us on Zoom can hear the language. So Article 2, Section 4, Professional Services reads as follows. A request for qualifications for professional services or a request for proposals shall be issued at least once every 10 years. The responses will be made available for town council review. The town council may then direct the town manager to engage in negotiations with respondents to RFQs or may choose to award a contract to a respondent to an RFP. If the town council does not believe that an RFQ or RFP would produce an appropriate pool of qualified respondents, it may direct the town manager to pursue procuring professional services in a different manner. I will say in the staff memo, we do highlight this section as well as one other section of the proposed draft where Town Manager Matthews and I, in our discussion and revision of language, had some concerns, and we wanted to make sure that Town Council and the mayor were aware of what those concerns were. How Town Council chooses to address or not address those concerns is obviously up to all of you here tonight and what you deem to be the best way forward for the community. But the two sections are, again, professional services. We set the threshold at 10 years as the minimum in order to allow for certain professional services, such as the town engineer or the town attorney, whose work benefits heavily from having familiarity and some continuity across years, but still respecting that other services like the auditor, potentially IT, might benefit from being bid out more frequently. The other section of the proposed ordinance that staff had concerns with after the December 9th meeting and the conversation that evening was Article 2, Section 1, Subsection 3, which deals with contract modification. We're particularly concerned about situations where there's not an immediately obvious threat to someone's health or safety, but where the delay in pulling together a council meeting to authorize a contract modification over $15,000 would significantly disrupt resident lives. As discussed in the memo, we did have a situation in calendar year 2024 when milling and paving work on Cambria Avenue, Kenilworth Avenue, and Shelley Court identified that there were some full depth patches that would be required before the road could be finished and opened back up to residents. That cost was over $15,000, which would have triggered the requirement in the current language. We would have had to order the contractor to cease all work until such time as a meeting could be organized, properly noticed in accordance with the Open Meetings Act, which does require at least a 24-hour notice before a meeting, and attended by a quorum of the town council. As I'm sure you all know, as we look ahead to budget season and trying to find a date and time that works to start preparing the FY26 budget, you all have other obligations outside of your time as elected officials. We are, as staff, sometimes concerned that trying to coordinate a quorum schedule might lead us to a situation where we have ordered a contractor to stop work. Residents are being disrupted. In the example provided, it would have been unable to use their vehicles to access their home for several days longer than the bare minimum. And it would have resulted in increased costs from the contractors. As you all may recall, when you have a contractor mobilized, when they have everything they need to continue with work and they have to stop work, there are financial penalties associated with that. For details of what that might look like, I will turn it over to Town Manager Matthews if you have questions. But I did want to make sure before any further discussion and council's direction to staff that you are aware of these two areas and what the concerns are. Having said all of that, I welcome any comments, feedback, or discussion that the mayor and town council wish to have about the revised draft ordinance in front of you.
Just narrowly thought about that one, just since it's fresh on the mind, the one about the contract modification. Years ago, we had a discussion about smaller budget line. I feel like you were here for this, you might remember it better than me. With the sub numbers on that budget line, if something needed to be moved, the idea was that the mayor or the town manager could contact the council members and I remember what it was like a 3 day.
3 days.
Yeah, something to kind of give notice back, I wonder if something similar could be done on this. That way it would keep the idea that, if there is a pretty hefty change order, it still has to be justified at the next meeting, but, something could be done less formal than a call a special council meeting to do it on something, especially if it's most likely going to be approved. I worry about making it where there's no checks on change orders, and having dealt with the SRCS project, it's just like nothing I've ever seen as far as change orders that weren't disclosed. So and maybe that's a potential middle ground.
I appreciate you kind of bringing me up to speed on that conversation. I think a bulk of that conversation occurred before my time with the town. If that's something your colleagues feel would be an appropriate halfway measure to balance having some checks on a contract modification of a large size while minimizing disruption to residents, I would appreciate kind of an indication tonight, and we can work on updating that language. If a council member has perhaps an alternative they'd like to throw out, I'd also welcome hearing that.
Was my memory correct on that, Phil? It's kind of like a 3-day
Yeah.
notice.
Would the
Yep.
contractor have to
It's-
stop for 3 days while we're getting the approval or not?
Yes, they would have to stop work.
Because I think the idea of this is to try to preclude the cost and disruption of stopping to move forward. So I think that's what they're trying to solve for.
But I wonder if a contractor is doing a contract in that range and they need a $15,000 change order and they haven't thought it ahead more than a couple hours, I think that's strongly in their court as their fault.
Yeah.
So like,
it-
we shouldn't be in positions where they're kind of like, oh, we can't do anything until you do this
Yeah.
right away. So maybe it's less of a concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Kayla and I tried to talk this through, I think that, and we could run into something potentially similar with town hall. I mean, I think active construction projects, there's always a chance you're going to find something unforeseen. In the case of the road and sidewalk improvements contract, you don't know what's there until you mill. And then once you mill and you find out that you need full depth patches, you've got a contractor, their staff, a bunch of equipment sitting around, residents blocked from their homes.
And equipment.
Yeah, so I think what we did, and I remember saying this to you all, I texted you at the time because, we needed to define the quantities and get cost, but basically it was roughly around $40,000 by the time it was all said and done. And we had everything torn up. So we've struggled a little bit, I think, as a staff to balance what is your understandable concern about not wanting having contracts changed and not being a part of that, since the town council is the one who authorizes contracts to begin with, against those very time sensitive, at least from our perspective, situations where delays will actually cost the town money. And it's not going to make any difference in the end because you have no choice really, but for us to actually fix the street properly. So we've struggled with how to battle those two positions. And so we just at least wanted to raise it. But I think oftentimes with road work, it's almost inevitably, we had 3 streets. I think when we look out ahead, we've got much larger projects than we even had this year. $15,000 isn't a lot of money in the construction realm. So as Kayla said, I think we're open to whatever guidance you can give, because we know what the issue is. We're just not sure how to straddle the concern about day-to-day things versus a construction project that's underway.
Is the notion that the second paragraph of that provision is not sufficient to meet that sort of circumstance that you just outlined?
So that second paragraph, which reads, in the event that the town manager is notified of an emergent threat to health or safety.
And
If we
having
potentially,
people not being able to access their homes is not a safety issue? I would,
I
you
think
need
it
to
could be
interpret this,
argued, and-
interpret this.
if the mayor and council is comfortable with staff interpreting multiple days of being unable to access your home via vehicle as a health and safety issue, then I would say that addresses the concern. We just want to, as staff, make sure that we are interpreting this language in the same way that you as the elected officials would. Our concern would be that there might be folks sitting here tonight who would go, while it's an inconvenience, we don't consider it a health and safety threat. We found that staff, by authorizing this change order under that language, exceeded their authority. But if the comfort level is a multi-day disruption as such would be a health or safety threat, resolve it promptly. That resolve.
Health or safety threat or major inconvenience. And I mean, does that solve the problem? I mean, I'm in agreement, but I'm not sure it rises to the level of violation of health and safety.
And
Well, how
that's
about
part of,
something more along the lines of significant and or costly disruption.
okay.
It's another way to safeguard it. I think we've talked about a bunch of different things going out to contract, and Phil more often than not has kind of suggested why don't we put a little extra in just in case, something else is needed. I wonder if some of these contracts can't be, don't have it stipulated in there where the contractor knows, and hey, I know they have this much extra in their pocket, but something where we know, and you know that there's a certain amount that it's up to your discretion. If it's more timely to kind of say, up to 20% or whatever that number is. I wonder if that maybe solves it in a different way, and then you would be able to report back to, which you would in your town manager report. That would solve my concern. I think is my concern was things like SRTS. There were a lot of changes I didn't know about it until like a year after the project was over.
Yeah. So
That might be an informal solution, but I would be happier with something, codified.
Because I'm wondering if there's a way to codify it that way to kind of say, or maybe when we do the contracts to kind of say that, that's $100,000 and there's 20% for contingency.
I think it's less about the funding for the contingency and more the council comfort with authorizing that. Because we do maintain a contingency fund. Council has previously made at times contract awards, but it's more of the notification and the authority to actually tap that contingency that we want to make sure we have in place.
If I may, to Stephen's point, and Phil, you may recall this because I think you were the person who put it forward when we did the I'm trying to remember when you worded the contract, but anyway, it was for the community center site improvements and drainage improvements.
Mhm.
When you all made the motion, it did not make its way into the actual contract that we signed because they obviously had given us, firm prices for the work. But as I recall, your the contract authorization that you gave us did have some wiggle room, if you will,
Yes.
in case things came up. In that case, it actually didn't, but it was helpful to have.
And that's what I'm thinking. I mean, along the line, Stephen's line, I think it's the same thing, except we're talking about contingency attached to a project, not the general contingency line. Right. And that's what I'm thinking, because we always seem to run into something like that.
Just the trick is to make sure that if we go with something like that, the town staff would need to know what it is, and we would all need to know what it is, but the contractor can't know what it is.
Right.
So,
And that's a little challenging when you are awarding these contracts in a public meeting that is recorded, that has minutes generated. And that's part of why I think staff's initial reaction was to look at perhaps a modification of the code language where it is kind of the slightly more flexible, as Shirley proposed, significant or costly disruption. That opens up a bit more discretion. It does still require that we obviously make you as the elected body aware. And again, it's a matter of you are the elected officials. You have to explain to your neighbors kind of either why they couldn't access their home for an additional 3 days with their vehicle, or why these change orders, contract modifications.
Yeah, I think in addition to that disruption language that we talked about, adding in that the town manager would secure approval of the mayor. It appears in the first paragraph, but it doesn't appear in that second paragraph. So I think adding that in along with the disruption language would give some additional checks and balances. And then you still have the notification to the town council within 3 days.
Yes.
I personally would be okay with even less than 3 days, like if it's a timely matter, just perhaps like something where it's gonna, we talked to one, maybe not even, but perhaps if you talk to the mayor and town management and or town staff and mayor are in agreement, maybe just a notice to the council that, if we don't hear, and Mark's done this well before, like if we don't hear from you in X amount of time, then we assume you have no comment or no concern. So, I'll be okay with that, if others would be.
Yeah, me too.
It sounds like we've kind of hit upon language that everyone would be comfortable with, so I will revise that to include that. I appreciate you all taking the time to kind of talk through staff concerns on that matter and where we're at. As I mentioned, the other area had been Article 2, Section 4, professional services. Given that that had been a source of discussion last month, I do want to make sure before we kind of ask for what council would like our next steps to be, that everyone is comfortable with that language. And if they're not, that we address it here and now.
I have a question, like what is our arrangement with the town, quote unquote, town engineer? Do we have like an RFQ contract, like IDIQ contract with them, or are they just assuming that they will work that we come up with?
No, there is a contract. As best as I can trace through, I think after I kind of went back through just for my own benefit and sort of researched the history of the various professional service contracts that were mentioned at the meeting. The town at one time had a relationship with a different firm. Some of the principals of that firm then broke off and basically formed Clark Azar, is what it appears. Based in Phil, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And it was somewhat similar on the legal front. We had a relationship with the firm. People left to go to a different firm, and then Ron Bolt formed his own company. But yeah, we have basically, there's sort of the general overarching contract that the town entered into. And then as particular scopes of services come up, for example, like the road and sidewalk improvements project or something, then there's task orders that basically will govern other work that we might add. So there's
So
sort
it's
of
an hourly fee basis.
they're all on hourly fees,
Right.
yes.
Then what's different than what worked on the other side of those IDIQ projects? A lot of times they would be like a smaller project relative to that government entity versus like the really large projects they would put out, or medium or larger projects they would put out for like a more competitive bid. I wonder perhaps if we don't already have it, if we shouldn't do the same thing. Like, I think I'm not displeased by Clark Azar's work, but I'm not overwhelmed by it either. So like, I feel like we might be in good shape to, on a more substantial project, not just assume that they will have to do it. I mean, just have them do the small projects and give them the ability to do larger projects.
What would, in your mind, Stephen, be a larger project, just out of curiosity?
Over 50 grand.
Maybe even less, maybe even like 20. I wonder if like
That's-
something like Yandle, like, I mean, I would guess that
Yandle?
town's pattern is just that Yandle.
There really
pattern is
hasn't
just
been
assuming-
much engineering work
Yeah.
related to Yandle.
I guess they've done all of our street work.
Yeah, that's the largest part
The
of,
dog park when it comes up, and then the field next to the pool are the two things that
yeah.
we're gonna need some work done, I hope soon.
I feel like those kind of things would be nice to have cost competitive for that and competitiveness for that, and then perhaps a chance to review perhaps more creativity too. Like I feel like we really did good value with like what they did for the pool wall.
I don't think that's such a bad idea, but I don't think we have to write it in here either.
Yeah.
That's just a matter of practice. You know, that would
Correct.
be added when you think of the project.
Yeah, maybe just almost like, I guess you're suggesting that. if you
Yeah, I'm
think of-
suggesting it's a good idea, but I don't think it's the kind of thing you would write into your code to say,
Yeah.
projects of X criteria would be, done differently. I think it's just a matter of practice. We always have the ability to either use our own staff or professional staff, or hire out the work instead of using an on-retainer.
So kind of, if we're going to move forward with the project, then we'd be able to kind of state that we'd like to open it up versus,
Right.
or if we don't say it, then just
Yeah, during
assume.
that early scoping phase. we
Yeah,
figure that out.
Any further? I would have just one observation and one question. The observation derives from the minutes of the last meeting, which we just approved, wherein Councilmember Bennett suggested wisely that Mayor Keller and Town Manager Matthews review the proposed ordinance to ensure clarity of their respective roles. I dropped the ball on that. I want to assure you that we would do so before this gets to you in the next round. And that in turn raises pretty much the same question I proposed last time, which is, are you comfortable having the next round be a formal ordinance? In other words, going from a page and a half of policy guidelines to a 6 or 8 page ordinance with the complexity and formality that brings. As you know, there are fines associated with non-compliance of ordinances. I doubt they would ever come into play here. It's just an element of added formality that I'm not sure is commensurate with the desired end here. But I'm just throwing that out as something you may want to consider. I have no vote in the matter. If you want to pursue it, it will have to continue. I believe it's been done so far with the input from Mr. Bolt.
It has,
Yeah.
yes.
And on things such as the contract modification that you were discussing at length, my expectation would be that he has experience from other small municipalities as to what they might do in those circumstances. And I would certainly explore with him that specific issue and more generally the level of detail, formality, and complexity that is necessary in procurement for a town of this size.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think actually as we were working on this, we did look at smaller municipality codes. Kayla delved into those quite extensively. The other thing I would just add is, obviously, I've been at this for a long time, worked, and varying sizes of cities. What I would say is that when it comes to procurement, the overarching themes are certainly going to be trying to ensure that there's a level playing field for people to bid on projects, to make sure that public funds are expended in the best manner possible. There's a transparency aspect of it. Those principles actually don't have anything to do with what size of community you have, I would say. What Kayla, and she's done a yeoman's job working on this, the principles that are here are largely the same things you will see in procurement codes for probably the largest city I've worked for was one that was about 500,000 in population at the time. They're all fairly similar because they're all trying to achieve the same thing, regardless of what level of government you're at. I think where some of the nuances come are the personal preferences that you might have in terms of how do contract modifications get handled. But almost any procurement ordinance is going to have that. And I would also note that as we tried to work on this, and Stephen, you have probably been the most forthcoming, I guess, in terms of concerns you have had about things that have happened in the past. And those predated me, so I'm not commenting on those, but the more formality or structure there is, the less likely it is that someone's going to go astray. Because in the absence of any specificity, it's left up to the particular people who are in charge at that time, whatever their role might be. So I think we have heard some of the concerns that have been expressed, particularly in my case by Stephen, and trying to provide as much structure as we can around that so that as people come and go, at least the principles of this town council are kind of set in stone, and they provide a guideline as staff turns over. So I don't know if those comments are helpful, but there is some uniformity in terms of how you see procurement codes across the land, regardless of the size of cities or counties.
Barb, along those lines, is there any particular benefit to having it as part of the code as opposed to a policy? It does seem like there could be some benefits to having a policy where we could have some additional flexibility or it would be easier to change in the future?
Yeah, I can honestly say, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, until I came to Garrett Park, I had never seen a procurement code that was not codified. For exactly the reasons I just tried to outline. They are providing a sense of bidders of what the ground rules are. They're out there publicly, and people do pay attention to that.
And also to keep the town council informed of what's going on.
Sure.
Couldn't there be liabilities if we don't have this specified in the ordinances?
It depends on the way the codes are structured, you know, and then there are some nuances. I think Kayla, correct me if I'm wrong, you embedded in a procedure in terms of if someone wants to appeal a bid award. The city of Rockville, for example, much larger than us, basically, there were, just because of their thresholds, there were routine, fairly large contracts, comparatively speaking, awarded by staff, and there was no appeal. But their code, like is proposed here, also had very specific standards. Contracts of a certain magnitude are subject to certain provisions of state law. So there are certain contracts that just are of a certain dollar value that state law requires that they be posted on the state procurement website, for example. So
What about some of the state and federal grants that we've been pursuing? Do they usually come with procurement requirements? Not in
No.
terms of, there is a provision in here about adherence to the state, so separately from ours, but are there any requirements that we have procedures that we codify, for example?
most of the grants really focus, like I will say with the ARPA funds, as you all know, that was something really had to dig into in terms of, because it wasn't really clear. And Ron Boat was very helpful in helping me try to thread through federal procurement guidelines, which are not the easiest things to read. They simply basically said you had to follow your own procurement procedures, for example, was what sort of the overarching thing with ARPA funds. There can be grant funds that do have specific requirements. Generally, they're just wanting to make sure that there's open competition as a general rule.
Right, and you've accounted for that in this language, okay.
I've always been curious, I guess, all the years I've been volunteering on council, I've always heard that there's policy and other things that are outside of the code, but like, I've never seen like where they're kept, like how would like if we didn't have this codified in the ordinance, how would residents even know it was there? And plus, we did sit in a meeting here where the policy was put in front of
Like the
people and
procurement
they were
guidelines.
told that it weren't done.
There's a document that's maintained in the town office. It's not publicized anywhere because it's not part of the code. I think, Stephen, the one you alluded to earlier, which I believe came up during former Mayor Benjamin's term in terms of the notification if funding was going to be moved from the contingency account. That actually is in the code now, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah.
All these other policies, what is it total up to? Like how many things do we have that are kind of sort of expected to be followed that are not in the ordinance? Like I wonder if there's a benefit for us to even having such a setup.
Full moon as the light shines.
Yeah.
You see that document.
So-
The lock is open.
And so you can see it on a full moon or on a new moon. We do like to offer that flexibility for people who run on a different schedule, maybe have some lycanthropy happening.
Happened to be noon today.
So-
Full moon today.
So we were just conferring, trying to think of policies that kind of fell into that category. Town Manager Matthews pointed out that the sledding policy is also one. Might not need to be codified, but is kind of out there outside of the code. Part of the value of a code is that everyone knows to go to the same source. We're not all reading different translations of, the Odyssey and the kind of different communication issues that can cause. Again, it is up to you as the elected body. If you don't wish to pursue codifying this, that is your decision. If you are happy with this and want to move forward, if you'd like to put it on the back burner for a month and reevaluate it in March to see if you want to bring it forward for introduction, you have options.
Just a couple of thoughts I had that may be in conflict with each other. One was, I'm just wondering if it could be a shorter document than perhaps what Ron's built it up to be, but still I very much
So-
agree with the principles that.
Ron
are
Bolt
outlined.
reviewed the document. He did not build it up incredibly heavily. I think the only area where he added language was when I was talking about the state thresholds for what must be posted on the state procurement website. But is there a section in particular that you're looking at and feeling that does not need to be codified, kind of if we're going to trim away what might be considered excessive?
I don't
I'd
think I
like to make
have
sure that
anything
everyone's on the same
particular in
page.
mind,
Is Article 5 redundant of existing requirements, or do we have to enact that to have ethics in contracting addressed at all?
So that would be one that I would strongly urge the mayor and town council to keep in. That is one of the more serious issues you can run into with procurement, is someone alleging that there was some sort of collusive bidding or that there was other inappropriate behavior either by someone involved with the award or by someone involved in the bidding.
It's not already required by state law.
While it might be required by state law, it is always good to have that additional language. I would have to review the state procurement code to see what exactly they say about collusive bidding. And I don't have that language in front of me tonight, so I don't want to commit too far. But I will say, I think there are other areas that if you truly feel the need to remove, could be removed first. I would remove the ethics as the very last resort.
I mean, at the end of the day, if I understand this ordinance, basically it should make it easier for you folks to figure out what's going on. And it's a lot easier to refer to this ordinance and say, okay, it says do this, so that's what we get to do. It sets down the ground rules that I think has been mentioned earlier and just makes it easier for everybody. And there's no real questions and you don't have to wait and go to some other document. I mean, I'm in favor of, I always was in favor of running things a bit longer, but that's just who I am.
Stephen, I just did a quick search of anything that I could find very quickly that talked about town policies or practices or just something that wasn't codified. And I don't think they would necessarily should be, but one was, there's a 2021 document that talks about farmers market guidelines. And there is something dating back to 2020 that has to do with postings at Penn Place. So I'm not sure that's helpful, but I'm not sure,
I didn't
other than
even know
those
those
kind of
existed,
things
so.
and the sledding hill policy, I wouldn't see any of those to be codified.
Yeah, they don't have to be codified. I guess the one that was strange when it came up years ago, where we talked about like parking fines and things like that. I felt like that didn't make any sense to be off the code versus in the code. but for whatever reason, it was pushed as being off.
Those are actually, and I may have mentioned this in passing at a prior meeting, but those are typically codified so that there is the force of law behind them in terms of being able to actually enforce them. And that is an issue that Ron Bolt has actually raised with me, that doing them by a regulation probably does not have the force of law behind them.
But didn't we also have the option to modify them by regulation, right? Or by resolution, I should
Yeah,
say.
part of, I think, the issue is in his mind, going back to the history, is yes, they were reviewed, but sort of the delegation. Oftentimes how I've seen stop sign placements, no parking zones, there's typically a chapter or section in a code that talks about just sort of the regulatory, how those things get put in place. And they're actually an appendix in the code. So if you look at, I believe the city of Rockville's code would be one of them. Tacoma Park's the same way. There are both appendices that basically list all the things that would constitute a parking offense. So there's sort of an umbrella ordinance and then they're put in the appendix.
Gotcha.
That would make more sense because it just never made sense to me back when we talked about it. This was what, 5 years ago? Or
Yeah.
something like that. That the idea that there would be fines talked about in the code, but then the list of what those infractions were would be just like on James Swearingen's desk. It didn't make any sense to me.
Right.
So yeah, it would be like, I guess my general question about like the procurement one is, I guess that's a little hope that we go, instead of going from like what it was like a page of an outline, just too short, up to like, I think it's literally 10 pages on here I just wonder if there was a middle ground, but I don't have anything specific to point out like that could be sacrificed. And I guess in the end, like thinking about it the other way, like procurement's a pretty big part of what we discuss almost every meeting anyway. So maybe it's a decent thing to just go ahead and let it be whatever's necessary. It's just me thinking it through, you know, myself.
And I appreciate you taking the time to consider, and as always, yes, we need transparency and consistency, but we also need something that the elected body views as meeting, but not exceeding the needs of the town. I will remind you of a comment I made earlier that town council can at any point say that they're disinclined to bring this forward for a formal introduction. They can, of course, direct myself with the help of town manager Matthews to go back and revise it to address language as you did earlier tonight. You can also say that you'd like to consider it for a few more weeks, have time to settle your thoughts, and then we can put it on the March agenda to kind of decide how we want to move forward. So there are options before town council tonight. And it's just a matter of you and your colleagues determining what is going to be the most appropriate path forward.
I have a quick question on number 5, right to reject. It says that the town shall have the right to reject any and all such bids, proposals, or offers, but who would the town be? Is that the town council or the town manager, or who is the town? Or do we have to define it?
I would say it could be either the town manager or the town council.
Okay.
It might be something where town manager Matthews and I bring forward a bid that we think is responsive to everything, has the appropriate references, and town council says upon further review and consideration of the project, we're going to reject it. We don't feel that it is appropriate despite staff's recommendation.
So we don't have to specify who can
No,
reject.
because
Okay.
that is one where it can kind of flip between one of two entities.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, and I've got another hopefully quick question. I noticed under the section 4 professional services, it said that the request for proposals shall be issued at least once every 10 years. How did you come up with 10 years, and should it be shorter or?
So that was actually one of the most contentious points between town manager Matthews and I. So I applaud your ability to zero in on something that went back and forth. Part of our consideration was looking at, we know that there needs to be some sort of consistent specified frequency. Part of the reason it's phrased as at least once every 10 years is to preserve the right of town council to direct staff to, you know, we bid out the IT contract 4 years ago, but you feel it's appropriate and necessary to direct us to prepare it for the upcoming fiscal year to be bid out again. We want to preserve your ability to direct for more frequent biddings. As mentioned in the staff memo, professional services is kind of a tough category. There are things like the town attorney where having a potential longer contract, having more time for the individual or firm to become familiar with the Garrett Parkisms. I'm sure you all can remember various conversations where we've turned to either Mayor Keller or Councilmember Schultz as some of our longest serving elected officials and residents to help clarify what actually was the conversation when this originally came up 10, 15, 20 years ago. There is, to my mind and to town manager Matthews' mind, having the ability to have an attorney or an engineer who is more familiar with Garrett Park, which that takes time to build familiarity. I think we've said even earlier tonight that there was a conversation that I wasn't yet here for. I don't have the familiarity to speak with the authority that I would need to, so I didn't. But there are also professional services like auditing and IT where there's much more consistency in what they're looking for, whether they're looking for a contract for a small municipality or large one. We're trying to balance having a minimum requirement to help alleviate some of the concerns Councilmember Bennett pointed out at the December 9th meeting, while also recognizing that what you need from your attorney is not what you need from your auditor. You need both.
It does say once, at least once.
Right.
So it's fine,
Right.
right? I mean, it covers us. I mean,
Right.
It does, but I was just curious of why we picked, say, 10 versus 5, but I understand the reasoning. Makes perfect
We went
sense.
back and forth. At one point, I had thrown out 7 as a kind of compromise value. Town Manager Matthews and I think this was one of the longest conversations we had. If that's something where council as a whole would like to adjust it to be a shorter time frame, if council as a whole is fine with the language in the code saying at least once every 10 years, knowing that they have the discretion to, at any point in time, direct staff, please prepare an RFP.
I feel like it's
Okay,
fine
so-
this way, yeah, because at first read it,
It's,
it almost could be misconstrued to mean it has to be a contract at least 10 years, but it's the opposite of that. So
No.
this is
So
fine.
You don't need a formal motion, but I mean, I would like to encourage, we have momentum, let's move this forward if we're going to.
I agree.
The consensus seems to be that you want to continue in the context of a proposed ordinance. That you would like a little more information perhaps on section 4 of part 3. Section
My
4?
notes are differing from yours, Mayor Keller. I have that it's Article 2, Section 1, subsection 3, where we want to see language added to address significant or costly disruption and to repeat the language directing the town manager to secure the approval of the mayor. That was kind of the biggest and only edit that I have reported down tonight. It sounded like professional services is one where
Yeah,
everyone
I
has
was-
talked through and
Looking at the wrong section.
It sounded like, Chris, you would plan to take a deeper dive back into it, and I guess I'm kind of overdue with doing a deeper dive myself. I would be okay with like putting forward, like targeting March for an introduction, but curious if I'm the only one, if everyone else would rather introduce it in February.
Well, you can't introduce an ordinance in February without having a special meeting at some point. Because your next meeting in which you adopt it is less than 30 days. The meeting after that is longer. Correct me if
I
I'm
forgot there's
wrong.
30 days,
but
yeah,
If you wait till the following meeting, the introduced ordinance has expired. So it really obliges you to do it in March.
that also would give me time to confirm with Ron Bolt that everything is 100% bolted down. So.
I think March is fine.
that's
okay.
fine.
Thank you all for your time and consideration tonight. I'm going to hand it over to Town Manager Matthews for the next item on the agenda.
Mayor Keller, would you be opposed to moving up the proposed ordinance regarding the street code, since we do have the chair of our Arboretum Committee here in
I was
attendance?
about to propose the same.
Okay.
So we're moving now to new business. About 35 minutes after. we'd like to be.
Try to
And
pick up
we are
time.
proposing to take the next to last item, proposed ordinance amending the street code and dealing with it next.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Is that,
The second and third to the last things in the packet.
So before you this evening is a proposed ordinance just for discussion purposes only, with the goal of strengthening protection and maintenance of trees in the right of way. So when I was working with the town attorney on the drafting of an unrelated ordinance, probably going back roughly a year, we sort of diverged and kind of got into a discussion about the existing language concerning town trees and certain issues with that. So there's always been an understanding that the only party who can prune a town tree would be the town itself or its designated contractor. In fact, the existing code language in section 716A does not prohibit resident pruning of town trees. It prohibits injuries to the tree. So you would have to essentially show that the pruning that was done was actually injurious to the tree. I think many of you may be aware that if Jerry and Todd are next door neighbors and the limb of Todd's tree is hanging over onto Jerry's property, she can trim it. So it's kind of, I think that seems to be the underlying idea. So essentially what 716B requires is that the neighbor to the town tree would actually have to notify us, but then they could do whatever they wanted to the tree in terms of benign pruning, as long as it wasn't deemed to be harmful. Kind of along the same lines of notification. So we have a blanket permit with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So if you are going to remove a tree that is in town right of way, when I first came to Maryland roughly 20 years ago, you would have to basically go to DNR and basically ask for permission for each and every single tree that you wanted to do something with. And that was in your own right of way, not in state right of way. The state, just because of the volume of requests, eventually kind of streamlined their procedures. We now go every year, we get a blanket permit that we can prune, remove trees that are in the right of way. We are required to provide the name of our contractors, their license. And then for each calendar year, we file a report with the state indicating what pruning was done, the location of the trees, who the contractor was, and we do the same thing for removals. What our code currently states is that any resident could go directly to the Department of Natural Resources and seek their permission to remove a town tree, which is obviously not what we want to have happen. We want that to remain in the control of the town with its own trees. Additionally, there was just a housekeeping issue that Ron and I talked about. Basically, there's reference in 717A to ordinance number 4 of the town way back when in May of 1897. That ordinance was superseded and replaced when the updated town code was adopted in 1996. So those were it was kind of one of those happenstance things that kind of, comes up sort of unexpectedly. I started working with Mr. Bolt to draft a proposed ordinance to address these issues. Sean, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it goes back to probably February of last year that I had shared a draft of the ordinance at that time, and it has evolved over time with the input of the Arboretum Committee and Mr. Normandy's input, certainly. It took me a while to get back to Sean and Phil after they gave us some comments, recently refined it again. And certainly you can address any comments you have to Mr. Conlon directly. One of the other issues that the Arboretum Committee understandably has talked about was, how do we kind of ensure the protection of town trees? You may recall this from your discussion from your last meeting, where we had a fairly extensive discussion about fines and penalties, as we shared with you at that time. The Arboretum Committee had recommended and staff concurred that any violation of section 716, I apologize, should be declared a municipal infraction, and with the maximum municipal infraction fine allowable under law of $1,000. You all had agreed in concept, so that the proposed ordinance that is before you this evening does reflect that $1,000. Currently, any violation of a provision in Chapter 7 is punishable by a fine of $100, which if you're a contractor working on a house, that's probably not particularly painful to you. At the request of the Arboretum Committee in their most recent meeting, I believe that might have been in December, now maybe it probably was November, they had suggested that there be sort of a cross-reference in the right-of-way tree protection and maintenance ordinance to the town building permit and procedures and requirements. That is in part because we have had some discussions working with the Arboretum Committee about essentially a bond that someone would post to protect the right-of-way. So there has to be some tie-in between the two sections. Drawing your attention specifically to the ordinance, I wanted to let you know an issue that one of our town residents keenly noticed that none of us had. In section 17, you will note that we've added the word pruning in 716A. No person shall break, wound, destroy. What would be added would be prune, remove, or in any manner injure any of the trees or shrubbery now planted, blah, blah, blah. That works really well for trees because we're the only ones who should be touching them. It doesn't work that well in terms of shrubbery because we do allow as a community residents to plant their own shrubs in the town right of way. So that was just something that I think got by all of us. We can certainly craft language to do that. Town-owned and town-maintained shrubs are in a variety of locations on town-owned property. Right of way is kind of referred to as sort of town-controlled property. I have not talked to Mr. Bold about this. I had a brief discussion with our maintenance supervisor today. He said that if we were to go out and try to affix tags to each and every shrub that is town planted and town maintained would likely take the maintenance staff weeks. Clearly, that is not what we want to do. So we just need to kind of step back, I think, and have a little bit more discussion about how we do that. The initial thought, which I'd like to run by Mr. Bolt, may be to kind of separate out some of these sections and have a section that was particularly applicable to town trees, and then a section that is more applicable to shrubbery and with some alternate provisions. With time, you can work out any kind of language issue. What I would encourage you to focus on this evening, rather than trying to kind of solve the problem now with language, I've never seen that work out well on the fly, is just sort of focus on the other provisions in the proposed ordinance regarding specifically town trees and whether you are comfortable with taking that ordinance forward. I think once I know that you are, I can certainly work with Mr. Conlon and with the town attorney and figure out how we solve this shrubbery problem.
Or do we have any history of anyone damaging shrubbery on town property?
I didn't specifically ask our maintenance staff, two of whom have extensive history, not that I'm aware of, but I didn't specifically ask George that. It was more sort of, where do we have it and how problematic is it to define it in some easy way?
I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is our main goal here is to protect the town trees that are part of the arboretum. And do already allow the residents to manage shrubbery that's in the right of way adjacent to their property. So it seems to me it would be really simple to just remove the "in shrubbery" from section title and then from section B, and let it be.
Yeah.
Unless there's some raised concern that our shrubbery in town area, in front of town property, is at risk.
We had that fight with removing the bamboo because of visibility.
Yeah,
Right,
Mr.
but we managed that ourselves.
Yeah,
Well-
Mr. Normandy, and Sean, you were on the same email thread that I was. He seemed inclined to say there should be some protection to town shrubs. I think it's just a matter of defining it in a different way than I did here. Not even thinking about shrubs. So, we have shrubs at the pool property. We have shrubs, I believe, along some sections of Porcupine Woods, the nursery school.
We might be planting some in Gendell.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Right.
it's probably.
It just doesn't seem like that's a great risk that requires its own separate orders. But I do agree, if we're going to address it, we should address it separately
I
and just take in shrubbery out of
Yeah,
this.
yeah, I think we can probably do it within the same ordinance with probably some languages. I just couldn't come up with something today. And so I think if we can work it out, I think that should be relatively simple to do.
Now, what about invasives? I mean,
Yeah, that's bamboo.
Wells bamboo, it's these pricker bushes. I mean, I go through and fight with those things
We have.
next
been,
door to me and
We have, at Mr. Normandy's request, the maintenance staff, as they have time, has been for some time now, going on to town right of way and removing invasives.
And we use contract staff for that purpose as well.
Hmm? Yeah,
And
we
use
do.
contract staff
Correct.
for that.
well, but are citizens allowed to remove invasives?
Usually it's been, my experience, it's been the opposite problem where the
Yeah,
citizens.
that is correct.
Absolutely invasive.
You are correct, Stephen. Yeah.
No, like I've got invasives that come over onto my property, so I go over. I like to get rid of the things
Well,
if I
the
can.
impact of visibility on the street to be able to see, so things aren't blocking that. It seems
Yeah,
to me
We
is falls in the domain of our town to be able to take care of it.
we do, we do have another section in this chapter that the town attorney and I have also had some discussion about, and we talked about whether to try to meld the two things together into one ordinance. Mr. Bolt, rightfully so, in my opinion, basically said, let's kind of keep it simple. And it's also more transparent. I think if you try to throw too many things that are somewhat unrelated, though in the same chapter, it just becomes hard for people to sort of track what's going through the town council for discussion.
Right. Well, I do think it's really important that we remove the and shrubbery references to this section, because we are saying that we want all pruning to be picked up by the town or town contractor. And we definitely don't want to be tying ourselves to that for shrubbery. So I
Yeah.
think at a minimum, we could remove the and shrubbery from this section, and we could always
We'll
revisit later addressing town-owned and protected shrubbery.
Yeah, I had actually, when I saw Sean's email this weekend, I had sent a quick note to the town attorney to say, oops, didn't quite connect this thread. He was very involved today with matters relating to the attainable housing strategies thing and the legislation going through the state. So I assume I'll hear from him, but I don't disagree. This is not the shrubbery reference in 716A is in direct saying that someone can't prune it is in direct conflict with another provision in this chapter, which says residents are expected to kind of maintain their plantings and things.
Sean, do you have any comments? Do I need to go?
Yeah, it'll make sure that anyone watching at home can still hear you.
I don't really have a you capture of me, but my assumption is that shrubbery was in the I say shrubbery and all I can think of is money. I think shrubbery was in the original ordinance. My guess is to prevent people from having creative interpretations where they say holly's not a tree, it's a shrubbery. I hate holly. I'll cut it down. And so it probably made sense then when it was don't injure it, don't remove it. And there's a well-meaning thing there, and then there's a well-meaning thing of putting the pruning in to prevent it, but now they kind of interact in a bad way. So yeah, probably removing shrubbery, but there were some examples of things like viburnum, I think Phil said witch hazel, things that people could, that either are considered shrubs or could be considered shrubs, and then if people decide to creatively interpret ordinances and then argue about it. So I think, but definitely with all of this, you know, the one thing I would say on behalf of the Arboretum committee is when we read through this, we really had no intention to penalize people for doing obvious common sense things. That's why the fine was not set as a mandatory $1,000, was set as an up to. And that's to try to do things with, when somebody does something really egregious, like it's clear that they intentionally damage or remove a tree and we're just gonna suck up the fine. Well, then the fine would be whatever the town decides. But we had no intention of if somebody accidentally prunes a tree and doesn't realize they can't do it, I don't think the town is going to go after it. But that's up to the town. So yeah, I think that's all I had.
I had a question, like the viburnums and witch hazel, are there cases where those are planted by the town in front of residences, or are they, I'm guessing they're more like
Yeah,
in
so
the
the
triangles?
best most recent example is not, this may not be a great example because it would not be necessarily cared for by an individual, because it's in front of the grotto. So the grotto has viburnums planted just recently for screening. But because they're screening, they may be sort of on a property boundary or something like that. Somebody could think they would. But yeah, we do occasionally plant things that would be considered these shrubs.
I think the easiest example that might be most familiar to people is the osmanthus at the northeast corner of Kenilworth and Strathmore.
Okay.
It's a big, heavy, dark green hedge. Looks like holly, is in fact osmanthus. For years, that was just an overgrown strip.
It looks really nice.
With some bush honeysuckle and the like. Because the adjacent homeowner wanted it that way, and we have a long history of trying to accommodate homeowners. The minute that homeowner departed, we planted the osmanthus. It occasionally needs pruning because it grows into the sidewalk on the one side and into the street on the other. And typically, the town does that, but not always. Sometimes the homeowner does. The next homeowner at that location might prefer to not have that shrub there. You know, if I lived there, I'd want it there because it blocks the headlights as every car turns. It just sweeps across that corner. But the next owner may have the same sensibilities as the prior owner and not want it there. Under this, if we take out shrubbery, they could remove it.
So there may be some very specific examples, but I'm not exactly sure how to write that up. I would leave that to the legal folks, but we definitely did not intend for it to say that after it was sort of brought to our attention by the resident that we kind of had this weird interaction between two well-intentioned things. So definitely not our intention. Glad it was brought up. Makes sense to remove it to maybe a different line or whatever. So, yeah. And if anyone has any questions, I'm available about how we got to this point or what. It's all in the ordinance as well. So.
Thank you, Sean. I'll make sure to forward that Monty Python clip to everybody in the council for you.
It makes me wonder is there an official horticultural definition for shrubbery?
Well, Sean, the moment I saw a YouTube thing, I knew exactly where you were going with it.
I think I saw one that said shrubbery or small tree.
Now, what about trees that are town trees that overhang a homeowner's property and might even be endangering the homeowner's plantings?
Well, there is a provision in the ordinance to say that if someone has concerns, that they are basically to notify the town office, but not take action on a tree themselves.
Okay.
So you need guidance about whether to proceed with this.
Yes, I mean, obviously there'll be, we will address the shrubbery issue that I didn't catch and the committee didn't either, but I guess it's this, are there questions you have or in general with this one exception? Are you comfortable with our refining this per your discussion this evening and bringing it forward at some point in the next probably month or two?
Sounds like March would have to be the month.
Yes, apparently not.
Yeah.
But can we address invasives then? I mean, if there's invasives on town property,
That we have the right to remove it.
yeah,
Well, I think that
Invasive
this
shrubs or
gives us
invasive trees?
invasive
That are
vines
located on our
and
own property?
pricker bushes and,
in the right of way.
yeah, I guess in the right of way.
Yeah,
We can do shrubs.
But we just discussed removing the words and shrubbery.
Right.
from this.
Oh, but now I thought we were
And
bringing it,
addressing town managed shrubbery elsewhere or.
Right,
desirable
in it.
shrubbery.
okay,
some separate
then fine,
provision.
we're good. Okay.
That's a good way of putting it, Stephen. Thank you.
John?
No, I was just gonna say on that, we have had some discussion about that, the idea of residents sort of going kind of vigilante removing invasives. And sometimes that's fine, but sometimes like in one case, people have doing kind of remove things and then the contractor that we brought in to actually do the work to remove the invasives, we're like, I can't do anything with this, they've already cut everything off the bottom, I can't apply my chemicals, I don't know where they were. So
Yeah.
I don't know how you deal with that. It's probably not part of this ordinance, but we have had that discussion and we've talked to people who are weed warriors about, doesn't make sense to pile and cut. This is totally separate, but
Yeah.
does it sometimes make sense to have sort of official times when people can go out and work on sections of town right away?
Yeah.
Maybe not as something that we're just allowing as part of the ordinance.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback on what Sean is saying, sometime in the last 6 months, my sense was that we might have residents who were going on and cutting the bamboo on Yandell. If you cut bamboo at the wrong time, it actually becomes more aggressive in its growth. So, it's just one of those things where someone was trying to be helpful, but it can actually, as Sean was saying, be kind of counterproductive in some cases. So I guess Todd has indicated he seems generally favorable. Is there a sense of a majority of the council?
I'm favorable.
Okay, Just wanted to be clear. Thank you all then. Sean, thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Chris, you want me to go back to the top of the new business?
Sure.
I will.
We have a typo in the last part of that. Ordinance number 4 enacted in 1897. Will we incorporate?
I'm sorry.
1896, we incorporated, right? Oh, 1888.
Yeah,
So I guess that is a typo.
I'll check. Yeah, I will double check that. So the first kind of jumping back is Penn Place, what we refer to as tenant space B. This is the small space that you access through the third floor lobby. It's the one office that's to the right of the pantry for Black Market. So jumping back to August of 2022, there was a special town council meeting held on that date. There were 2 items on that agenda. One was town hall and some discussion about the renovation, and then the renovation of the town office. At the conclusion of the discussion regarding the town office, there were kind of 2 directions that came from the mayor and town council at that time. One was to determine if Black Market Bistro had any interest in renting the space. And then the second was if Black Market would not be interested in renting the space, then we were to proceed with doing some upgrades as part of the office renovation, and it would be determined at a later date whether that space would be returned kind of to a rental status or be incorporated into the town office in some way. Some of you may recall, it was Black Market deemed it too small for its needs. So in accordance with the direction, that space was painted as part of the renovation. We put blinds in, there was new flooring installed. As we were sort of going through the office renovation, one of our vendors happened to be on site and mentioned to me, just in passing, hey, what are you all going to do with this? I might be interested in renting it. Basically told him at the time it had not been determined. He reached out to me on, I believe it was last Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday, asking if we had made a decision because the building where he is currently located has been sold. The new owner is vacating all their tenants and their rental spaces. Basically, he needs to get out fairly soon. I let him know that I would, check with you all this evening to see whether or not you wanted to try to rent out tenant space B, or you wanted to maintain it for town office use, or alternatively just defer that decision. If you all desire to actually lease tenant space B, I would request your authorization to enter in lease negotiations with the party who's interested in renting it. Just as there was with Black Market, whatever that lease agreement would be brought forward for you, because you need to approve any type of lease agreements for tenant property.
Barb, do we have a sense of the market rate for the space?
I'd want to reach back out, going back as far as August 22, I reached out to a gentleman who owns office space in Kensington.
Right.
He had given me a range at that time for what because he came and actually walked the space with me just as sort of a courtesy. Very nice gentleman, and basically gave me sort of a range of what low end and high end of what he thought that space would rent for.
I would probably 2022.
I would probably want to reach out to him
Right.
and just verify that those figures
Right.
still stood. But yeah, I would check with him. He's pretty responsive and just ask him if he still felt comfortable with the numbers he had given me back then, or if something has shifted in the market that would move it one way or the other. So
Let me ask 2 threshold questions. Number 1, does the town office need that space either for its current purpose or any other?
We've talked about that. It is certainly it's a small space. So that's in and of itself is probably going to be somewhat limiting, but we do have someone who's interested. Having said that, it would always be nice to basically have a place to put sort of, archival files that don't need to be, actively accessed all the time. We do have, and I think it's working okay. We do have a space. If you remember pre-renovation, there was like a little cubby furniture piece that basically was where our maintenance supervisor basically had his laptop. We obviously have a counter. He has a place to put his laptop and some storage space. I think in a perfect world, it would be nice if he had a space that wasn't just, kind of in the center office where he needs to put everything away or something like that. So do I think, Mayor, that there could be a use for the space? Yes, at the same time, I'm also cognizant of the fact that some of you have expressed some interest in, raising town
In
revenues.
the income, right?
Yeah.
What would the gross rental income be for the space at the rate of the
On the-
19, what are you
Yeah,
talking about?
on the
a
high
year?
end, there was a range of roughly $200 a month that he gave me. On the high end, it would be just under $10,000 a year.
Okay, so that's a number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, the second part of my question was, if the council determines that they would like you to explore leasing it, could you empty the space
Yes.
from,
Yes,
for what, there are
Yeah.
currently some.
we did. We
few
actually,
remaining things in-
Kayla walked through it,
That would
because
be-
we wanted to make sure that if we brought this forward, we actually could empty it, and we feel we could. There's actually not that much in there. I think the guy stored the dog biscuits and things like that in there.
With those two questions answered, I will entertain a motion to get this on the table for further discussion, to authorize the staff to enter into negotiations with the party interested in leasing the space, with the understanding that any agreement would be brought before the council for approval.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion?
Well, I will discuss the possibility of using that space too. So I don't know if where that's gone, but
They can bid for it as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is just, depending on what they're looking to have stored, is just, if you go down into the archives, which I know most of you have, it's pretty chilly down there because it's
Yeah.
kept at a temperature that's not typically what an office temperature would be. And all the controls are basically run, not in that office.
Yep.
When you're storing a lot of paper files, you need forced storing for that purpose.
I think it was more along the line of having an office space where it was actually warmer and it wasn't, and there were windows and things like that. That's where,
Well, there's a split system in there, is that not? Cool.
I think the thermostats are in a different spot and that's what causes the problem, but I'll have to look and see.
And the archivist is not working full time, right? It's only a few
No.
hours that she's there.
Town council authorized a contract that sees a maximum of 12 hours per week with our current archivist, who does a pretty good job of adjusting to the temperature and making sure that she can work in a comfortable environment while still preserving the documents.
Is there not space in the main town office area that the archivist can work remotely?
So she's come up and at times used the conference room if she needs to spread out larger documents. Obviously, we have the kind of work counter bench. So she's utilized those spaces as the need arises. But I would say the majority of her work is occurring in the actual archival space at this point in time.
Okay, just wanted to ask.
All in favor of authorizing?
Aye.
That brings us to the Family Act.
The good news for the elected body is you don't actually have to take action on family. The state is compelling us to comply because you employ at least one person who works in the state of Maryland. So this is more of a briefing than a request for council direction. There is one kind of question that we'd like you to kind of thumbs up, thumbs down. But to review the document with you all, in 2022, the Maryland State Legislature passed the Time to Care Act. This act compelled the Maryland Department of Labor and the Secretary of the Department of Labor to design and implement a paid leave program for employees working in the state of Maryland. This program is designed to allow employees to take paid leave to attend to a serious health condition for themselves or a family member, to welcome a new child to their family, or to prepare a family member for deployment. Some of you hearing that language might look at it and go, that sounds remarkably similar to FMLA. The state was intentional in creating something that was similar to FMLA. However, they've changed some of the requirements, so FMLA is not a perfect apples to apples comparison. As you may recall from when we updated our personnel manual back in February of 2023, the town does not employ sufficient people to be subject to the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. But because the town employs at least one person in the state of Maryland, we will be subject to the Family Act under the state of Maryland's Act. So what does that actually look like? So family is designed to provide paid leave of up to $1,000 per week for up to 12 weeks for employees who are eligible and submit a claim to the state. I do want to emphasize that is submit a claim to the state. We do not, as the employer, get to determine what leave they get or how much or how long. That is a state decision. The family program will require that the town, as an employer, provide on a quarterly basis reports on the hours worked and wages paid to employees who are localized in Maryland. It doesn't matter where the employee resides. If their work occurs in Maryland, they are eligible for family. We will have our reporting requirements start July 1, 2025, the first day of fiscal year 2026. The current information is that we will have to remit our first payment by the end of October 2025 to capture that first quarter. What's really interesting about family and where it becomes potentially a little concerning for the town as an employer is the requirement that an employee is eligible if they have worked at least 680 hours in positions based in Maryland in the 4 preceding calendar quarters prior to when they need leave. Those hours do not have to be with the same employer, meaning that someone who takes a new job would be eligible if they had worked the minimum required hours with a prior employer. So I could depart, take a job in Rockville in February. If I get hit by a car in March, theoretically, I would be eligible for family. So it's a little challenging to kind of reconcile that, but the state is going to be the one keeping track of, has this person worked sufficient hours in a Maryland-based employment situation to qualify. I do want to really emphasize that this does not apply to contractors. They're going to have their own independent contractors. They're going to have their own way to participate in family, but we're not going to be on the hook for family contributions for those folks that we have contracts with, such as our archivist or our arborist. Are actually staff. The important thing about family is they do have a requirement that an employer hold an employee's job while they are out on family leave. The state is still working on giving us language, but there is a verbal acknowledgement that there would be a way to petition that holding a job would create exceptional hardship. And that was the exact phrasing used on several of the teleconferences, exceptional hardship in holding a job.
And how long do the job have to be held?
So the job would have to be held for the duration of the time that the person is out on family leave.
And how long is that?
So that is meant to be 12 weeks. However, we're about to hit our kind of real sticky wicket, our challenging situation. While the program is designed to be a maximum of 12 weeks per year, and please note that the year is not a calendar year or a fiscal year. The year starts from when the employee is first awarded leave. So if I get awarded leave tomorrow on January 14th, my year would run January 14th through January 14th. What's challenging is that while it's meant to only provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and thus job protection, the state has been clear that there are circumstances in which an employee could potentially receive up to 24 weeks of leave. So if they have a family qualifying event, we're going to go back to, I get hit by a car in March. That's a serious health concern. I would be eligible for up to 12 weeks to handle my own recovery. In that same period, if I welcome a child to my family, I've gone through the adoption process, I'm bringing home a kid, obviously I need to acclimate to that. The state has indicated that that would be eligible for another 12 weeks. They are viewing medical family and we'll call it parental family as kind of two sub-pools within the broader family category. And they've been clear, there are situations where that could make someone eligible for 24 weeks of leave. Another example came up and was much discussed on the conferences in the Q&A session was trying to determine would giving birth qualify as a serious health condition? And the state's indication was that that will depend on the doctor. If there is a doctor involved who feels that it does qualify, that could trigger another 12 plus 12 situation. They obviously are still working on updating regulations. Some new language was proposed just today about how the state would handle resolving disputes about determinations for who's eligible for leave and how much and at what rate. So obviously it's still an ongoing process, but as we're kind of staring down the town's creation of the budget for FY26, we did want to brief you on kind of what's coming down the pipeline, because there will be a minute but distinct budgetary impact.
When would we have to start funding this? I
In the
understand that-
FY26 budget, they're giving it
Okay,
kind of a year to seed the program. So
Right.
no one's
And-
going to be immediately eligible to put in a claim
until July of 2026.
until July 1 of 2026,
Right.
correct? So the beginning of FY27. Kind of important notes for you all as employers, the state has been cleared. You cannot compel employees to use their sick or their annual or any other leave before they go on family.
Wow.
You can offer it as a top-up if I'm hit by a car while working for Garrett Park. The state has a formula that is somewhat convoluted. Town Manager Matthews and I at one point did sit down trying to work through the formula. It's not great, but if the family formula does not make me whole to what my normal pay would be if I was working my duties and the town offers a buy-up program, I could elect to use my sick leave to supplement my compensation to make me as close to whole as I could possibly be. I do recommend that we offer as an employer a buy-up program, as was mentioned in the discussions about updating the personnel manual. It's both a recruitment and a retention tool to have good policies. While I hope that none of our employees are ever in a serious health condition situation where they need this, accidents happen. People have changes to their family. There are other factors to consider. And given the relatively low frequency with which someone would be tapping this, because again, remember, you have to submit a claim to the state and have the state approve family leave.
But you fund it every year to the state.
We contribute every year to the state. We have to remit on
Whether
a-
anybody uses it from our company or not.
whether anyone uses it or not.
Right.
The good news is because the town employs fewer than 15 people,
Right.
the contribution rate is lower than it would be. The state has been very clear. They've explicitly designed it this way so that larger employers are carrying more of the burden of funding the overall state trust
Right.
than the smaller employers.
Okay.
Kind of staying on the topic of the town's existing leave policies and how it interacts with family. The state does want to recognize that employers like the town might already have leave on the books that achieve some of family's goal. In this case, the town does have a parental leave policy. And what they have said so far, the process is if an employee of the town puts in a claim for 12 weeks of family kind of parental leave, within the first 5 business days of that claim being submitted, the state will contact the town and its designated contact person and say, hey, do you have anything in your existing policies that we should be aware of? At which point we would go, we do have an existing parental leave policy. The state would consider that in their determination of how much leave to award. The language has been very clear that it's up to 12 weeks of paid leave. The state has been clear they're going to consider, has the individual used family leave previously in the year? Is there a doctor involved who's potentially recommending a certain amount of leave? And they're also going to consider what the employer's existing leave policy looks like. So what they have said is if you have an existing parental leave policy, the town's breaks out to 3 weeks of paid parental leave, that would be kind of factored and considered. So it would not be a 12 plus 3. It would be a 3 plus 9 at most. Kind of the big thing that we kind of want to thumbs up, thumbs down from council on before we kind of ask you to share any questions you have so I can go back to the state. The state has emphasized that an employer may elect to make the full contribution on behalf of their employees rather than doing it as a payroll deduction. It is my recommendation, based on the fact that the total annual contributions for all employees, absolutely everyone, everything altogether, would be $2,400
Per year.
is what we're looking at currently. My recommendation is that town council elect, just have the town pay the full portion of it. We pay our accountant on an hourly basis, and I think there's a distinct possibility that if we were to do a payroll deduction, that has to be individually tailored, that is done kind of by hand on a bi-weekly basis, that we would expend more funds in paying our accountant than we would if we just paid it outright. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you all. Do you have questions? The state has some promised upcoming dates that they haven't confirmed the calendar setting, in which we'd be able to get a progress update on the remittance process as well as ask questions.
So our family leave policy would be, there'd be 12 weeks, say up to 12 weeks, we'll just use 12 weeks. So we have 3 weeks of our policy, and then they would have 9 weeks of the state's.
Up to 9 weeks of the states.
So basically, the winner on that deal is going to be the state because they don't have to pay as much. So
You know, the state is the one who gets to make the rules of the game, and they've decided that's a rule they would like to have in place.
Well, as I understand, the employee can elect not to take advantage of our leave.
right.
Apply immediately to the state. Is that right?
So it would be less about the employee electing not to use the parental leave offered by the town. My understanding is when the employee submits a claim, so we're going to use me as the example, I'm going through the process of adoption, I put my claim into the state. The state will then contact Town Manager Matthews and say, an employee of yours has submitted a claim. Do you have any relevant existing leave policies? At which point she will say, the town offers up to 3 weeks of parental leave. The state, when they're reviewing my application, will come back to me and say, your employer offers you 3 weeks of paid parental leave. You're going to use those 3 weeks, and then the state will offer you 9 weeks out of the trust.
Unlike health leave, the state leave is conditioned upon the employee utilizing their parental leave.
If they're submitting a parental claim. They're still working on nailing down some of the language, everything that I'm reporting out about how they expect the existing parental leave to interact with the state leave is that they would have the employee, pardon my phrasing, burn whatever their employer offers before they'd be awarded anything from the state. The state is, I believe, trying to avoid having folks tap the state trust fund for this if they're
Well,
It's-
this is what is charmingly known as an unfunded mandate.
Mhm.
And we have relatively little maneuvering room, and it sounds as though the dollar cost is not large. There's an
It is
there's
a
an
funded
overhead
mandate.
cost.
It
I'm
is a
sorry?
funded mandate. We have to fund it.
Right.
so.
Now,
And there's an overhead cost, quarterly reporting, all sorts of other things. But there's no point in
Out.
analyzing over it. It's
Mhm.
done deal unless we have questions or clarifying.
I just have
things.
one quick question. Has the state in doing this come up with any time frame in which they have to act and respond and approve? Because if somebody has a horrible accident and they submit this, can the states tend to take 12 weeks to tell them whether they get it or not, or is there
No,
anything
they
in
cannot
place?
take weeks upon weeks upon weeks to state that.
That would be the insurance company.
So the state has released preliminary timelines, and what they're saying is you will know about your claim within 30 days. It might even be within 15 business days. One of the bigger timelines, because a lot of the state's conversation has been focused on introducing family to employers, because employers have an obligation to start reporting hours, wages, and remitting much sooner than an employee can file a claim. The state seems to be prioritizing making employers aware of their responsibilities before they start reaching out to employees. But the timeline is you're going to know within 30 days, often sooner. What they have said in public sessions is that if I, as an employee, submit a claim, within 5 business days, my employer will be contacted just to verify, is there any relevant information we should have? And then the clock will kind of run down for them to come back and tell me, hey, we're going to award you 12 weeks of leave starting from this date.
And then I'd imagine there's also an appeals process if you don't like what they determine.
Yes, they literally just announced at about 12:30 this afternoon what the preliminary language is for the appeals process.
Right.
So they are still writing some guidelines. That's part of the frustration and challenge. Originally today, they were supposed to have a webinar talking about their process in getting the reporting portal set up. One of the things that a lot of employers have flagged in these public sessions, which the state has revealed, the average public session has 1,000 attendees via Zoom, and they receive somewhere between 300 and 500 questions per session. So there's a lot of details that people are trying to nail down.
Yeah, it's a big program. It's every employer, not just not-for-profits or.
It's
state
every
agencies, it's
employer. The
everybody.
only employer who seems to not be subject to this, based on my current reading, is the federal government.
Right,
Everyone else, if you have an employee in Maryland, you're on the hook.
right.
But
Well, it seems reasonable to follow your recommendation to not do the employee deductions.
I agree.
I would agree. Now, on our family leave policy, we are full pay.
we are full pay for up to 15 days per fiscal year.
Okay.
As kind of the details of the state family policy get nailed down, we might want to tweak that so that it lines up with the state's kind of rolling calendar. But I don't want to weigh in on that until I see the state's kind of final regulations, given that they keep issuing new updates.
Right.
But realistically, I would say 95% of what we have in the personnel manual is solid. When we do an update to it, it's mostly going to be, we acknowledge this program, we acknowledge our responsibilities. The bigger thing is going to be the number of times that the state requires us as an employer to notify employees. It's meant to be at date of hire at least once annually if we become aware there's any sort of qualifying event. And what I've said to Town Manager Matthews is, I suspect a lot of the legal challenges to this program will come from employees who argue that their employer did not meet the sufficient notification process. So I want to make sure the town is really on top of both providing notices and keeping a record of said notices, so that we can argue, listen, everyone in the office signed a get well card for Kayla when she got hit by a bus. We also told her, hey, there's a family program. And there's a reason I keep using myself as the example. I don't think anyone wants to kind of play back a meeting and hear their coworker say, oh, by the way, so-and-so might get hit by a bus and here's how it would play out.
Okay, let's move on.
Yes.
Is this our last?
Building permits.
I'm going to move through them as quickly as I can. So this is another one of these ordinances that sort of stem from something unrelated. As I mentioned earlier in the meeting, the Arboretum Committee had been talking about kind of right-of-way restoration bonds, which is very common to have as a permitting requirement for certain types of work. As we started kind of talking about that, it became clear that there are just some other opportunities, I guess, to address issues in Chapter 4. If there's a fairly detailed listing of what the proposed changes would do, but if I a number of them are what I would characterize as housekeeping issues, just basically explicitly stating that property owners need to sign their application. There's a 1-year time frame for how long your permit is valid. A reference to Chapter 7 in terms of driveways. Updating a state code reference. Kind of reformatting numbers. Saying you have to pay your application fee. So there's a whole group of things that sort of fall under that kind of housekeeping umbrella. On a substantive basis, this would basically say that a violation of a stop work order would be a municipal infraction, subject to a $1,000 fine for the more tenured members of the council. That recommendation may sound familiar to you. It was part of a more comprehensive ordinance that was brought forward in the fall of 2022, and the council declined to introduce that ordinance. As things stand now, I can issue a stop work order, but if someone violates it, it is actually not a municipal infraction to violate that. And that's obviously a problem. Any other violation of this chapter, per the discussion last month, would be a municipal infraction subject to a $500 penalty. As Ron Bolt and I were working on this, Ron rightfully noted that we issue permits for fences and swimming pools. However, there are no substantive regulations concerning either of those in the code currently. He asked me if I thought there should be, which I agreed. Not sure what my thoughts were, but I did reach out to the chair of our land use advisory committee as Ron and I were bandying this back and forth. And not surprisingly, Mr. Martin was very, very helpful. He provided us with a copy of a municipal code that he thought had very good regulations in terms of those issues and what those regulations should be. So you'll see in the proposed ordinance references basically to regulations for swimming pools and some recommendations in terms of what those regulations for both pools and fences should be. He also said, hey, while tackling this, perhaps we should put in some setbacks for accessory structures none currently exist. Mr. Martin recommended some recommended setbacks for accessory structures, which have been incorporated. And I would say the last sort of kind of grouping, if you will, and this is not an exhaustive list, but trying to kind of capture this for you in the interest of time, is this idea of a kind of protection of the public right of way and restoration provisions per the conversation that I had with Mr. Conlon and by extension, the Arboretum Committee. So the proposed ordinance basically does say that an application for a building permit would need to be accompanied by a performance bond or other kind of surety in an amount that would be established by resolution of the council to cover the cost of restoring the public right of way to its pre-construction condition. This is essentially a protection for the town. Should a contractor fail to do that, there is also a provision that basically states that we will provide notice that the public right of way has not been restored within the required 15-day notice period. If that were to occur, the town would, this ordinance would give the town the right to restore the area and either charge the property owner and or make a claim against the right of way bond to reimburse the town.
Who's gonna decide the amount of this bond?
You all would. It would be basically.
So it would just be one amount regardless of the size of the property or the size of the project?
Correct.
That's. I think it should be a sliding scale based on the magnitude of the work. I mean, if it's a $1,200 fence or a
Typically you would
$2 million home.
Typically, you would not generally charge a right-of-way restoration bond for a fence. You would for any kind of construction of a new house, certainly, building an addition. But that would basically be brought forward as part of a resolution. Ron Bolt has drafted one. We need to have a little bit more discussion about the actual amount. But obviously, we wanted to limit how much work we did on that if this ordinance wasn't going anywhere. So that's sort of the general grouping. Certainly if you have questions about specific sections, but I kind of tried to go through in the staff memo and go flag section by section what the practical impact would be.
Does anybody else require a right-of-way bond?
Very common. Almost everyone does.
No, okay.
Yeah.
This would be another one that's also in the bucket. We wouldn't be able to approve it till April at the soonest, right? So it could
Yeah, and
be
this-
introduced in March.
This actually is a little bit, has a kind of a special consideration. So as you all know, we have the right under state law. We don't have zoning authority, but we have the right to do building regulations. But part of the state land use article basically states that building regulations, we are obligated to provide a copy of these to the county council for comment at least 30 days before their adoption. Obviously, this is the first time you all are seeing this. Don't know if there's questions, but there is, even if you wanted to introduce in February, there are not 30 days between the February and March meetings. So we need to basically, at the earliest, and I'm not suggesting this is the time frame you all are comfortable with, at the earliest you could introduce this in February. I would then, make sure that any changes that were captured at introduction are captured, would send it to the county council. They would have 30 days to comment, which would mean that you couldn't adopt the ordinance until April at the earliest. And that's assuming introduction in February, which I'm not assuming.
Sounds like that's better than because you'd be able to incorporate the county portion of it.
Yeah, I would want you all to, obviously, this is just appearing on an agenda. You may get, things tend to prompt more community feedback when they actually come up for introduction. So I would not suggest, even if you all tell me that you're 100% comfortable tonight, that we would send anything to the county council until the ordinance was actually introduced by you all, so that what the county council is reviewing reflects what you're comfortable with before they go to that trouble to comment.
So Barb, would this ordinance apply to this property if we're gonna redo this property because we own the land? I mean, we own the building?
I'm just laughing, Lisa, because when I was talking to Greg Wiedemann in terms of just going through his letter before it went into the agenda packet, that was sort of one of the questions we had is, do you grant yourself a variance?
Right.
There's different ways of looking at that. Many jurisdictions don't go through the process, and there's those who feel like, okay, we're at least going to go through the public hearing because there's really nothing specifically in the code for a variance that excludes the town from its own
Right.
variance application process.
Right.
But sort of like me, myself, and I,
Right.
Kayla
I
and
mean,
I will
it's
fill
just
out
gonna
the-
add cost to the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is really to protect the town right of way, since
I
it's your own
understand.
right of way. I'm not sure that you wouldn't bond yourself because you're the ones controlling what happens to the right of way to begin with.
Okay, just curious.
I have two questions. One, the addition of the accessory building language, it makes sense, but I'm wondering if the requirement that accessory buildings must be located behind the rear building line is maybe going a little too far, or, what's the real purpose of that additional requirement beyond just the number of feet? That's one point. And then the other one is, it seems like the language relating to pools effectively makes it not possible to put a pool in if you live on a corner lot, which I think is also perhaps excessive.
Yeah, we relied heavily on the municipal ordinance that was provided to us by Mr. Martin. Obviously, you can have an opinion that's different than his. So happy to make whatever changes you all would like.
I would think on one of these, what is it, on page 4 at the top, D, limiting the locations upon which portable toilets may be placed or maintained, or prohibiting the placing or maintaining of. Would anybody actually prohibit the maintaining of a portable toilet? I can't, I think that would be counter to what one would
Yeah, I
want to
think the
do.
location is more the.
Oh, yes, I
the
can understand
critical
it.
Part. Yeah, and there are certainly just kind of generally accepted worker standards in terms of that. The general purpose of this entire section is that we do put conditions on permits, but to make sure that they are actually supported by law in the code. But we can certainly, Phil, are you suggesting that we just take out the maintained?
It's or prohibiting the placing or placing
The last section of it?
yeah, where it says especially or maintaining. I mean, if you've already agreed to place it, I don't see why one would want to.
Make sure. it gets
Once they're there, they
emptied.
have to be.
I would be more like, you want to make sure that they empty it.
Right.
Yeah, so Phil, are you suggesting that section would just say limiting the locations upon which portable toilets may be placed?
That would
Okay.
be yes.
End it there, okay.
Where that comes from, like some jurisdictions won't allow that portable toilet to be in the front yard. We've had
Yeah.
it in the
We have
street
it all
before.
over the
In the street for like 2 years.
Yeah, placing it, I can understand fully. I mean,
Okay,
but
They
maintaining,
have to be able to get to it.
right, okay,
right.
make that change, certainly.
Do we, so by this, we're not saying whether or not it could be in the front yard.
We are not, I think if you all, I mean, I can,
Anybody have an issue with?
when we,
I think it's kind of impractical in many cases to have it anywhere else because accepting it for maintenance is going to be
Yeah.
very difficult if it's in the rear yard. You want them to maintain them because you don't want. them to
yeah,
smell.
I can think of one that was on, I think what street it was on. And this was a permit that was issued before I was with the town, so I don't know if it was a requirement or was just a nice action by the residents. But there was one that was in the front yard and was there for some time because of the nature of the work they were doing on their property. And they sort of had almost like a little lattice thing.
They did, yeah, that was,
Shielding it a little bit, which I
yeah.
thought was a very.
It's right next to Dave Almey's house. I
Right,
know
a
exactly.
nice thing for someone to do.
Yeah,
You know, we did have a resident, as you know, with the Waverly sidewalk. I did have someone who had a lovely view of the Porta John for a while, who was basically, did contact me to say, is this thing going away anytime soon? You know, when we were talking about Waverly, there really wasn't, there weren't
Right.
too many places we could put it.
I would say, even if you think about the house next door to this building we're sitting in.
Yeah.
You know, if you prohibited from the front yard, they wouldn't have anywhere to put it because their backyard's about 8 feet deep, as I recall.
And it's a
Yeah.
construction zone.
And it's a
You can't
construction
get to
zone,
it, right.
right?
I will make that change.
And I had a general question too, like, I think it's existing text, but on page 5,
Mhm.
there are a couple, I think they've been there a long time, references to single family residential. I think one of the things we've been concerned about is should we be preempting to make sure that our setbacks that we're setting up for Garrett Park, that they would cover any type of residential? I
Yeah.
wonder, does it make sense to take that out at this point?
If you go to, and I don't, this was the town attorney's recommendation for exactly the same issue. If you go to page 2 of the proposed ordinance, there would be an added definition to section 102, which would define a main building. The town attorney recommended that in light of all the attainable housing strategies discussion. But basically, it would reinforce that a main building would include any detached house, duplex, triplex, quadplex. Basically, it's the whole kit and caboodle of everything that's being talked about as part of the AHS.
So would we want to change, to Stephen's point, would we want to change that instead of saying single family house to main building? Or build, or just residential use?
Yeah, that might make sense. I can go back and double check that with Ron.
Just the possibility, yeah, that'd be great. to
I
ask
think
them.
that, it's a good question, Stephen.
The potential might be that they would try to use that to say, well, that's fine for, you can have your setbacks for your single family. not
Because
for our
3,
quad.
because 3 defines a proposed building or addition. They don't really say what kind of building or addition it would be.
Yeah, but I guess we're looking at this one that's down further on page 5.
Yeah, but it should all be consistent.
Yeah. I'll follow up with
Yeah,
Ron and
see if then
basically,
I'll measure
yeah, see if
and
the
things we should-
definition triggers something else.
We're ready to introduce that. When would that be?
April.
One other
Well,
small-
you could introduce next month if you wanted, with the one change that Phil mentioned and then the clarification that Stephen rightfully pointed out.
Approval, if not before.
Right, I think, right. Does everyone want to see this on your agenda in February? Or do you feel like would like more time to kind of mull this over?
Well, let me ask just one question. We require, in the current scheme, there are required documents for building permit and additional documents that may be required. In this, we change that to making a boundary survey be an absolute requirement. for
If
things
it's within 2 feet of the right of way.
That's in the variance ordinance
Yeah.
that has yet to
It
be
says 1
discussed.
foot for the regular permit, I think.
Yeah, this
Well,
basically says a plat or
well-
survey has to be of sufficient accuracy to determine if any existing or proposed improvements encroach or may encroach into any required setback. And then it does say if the proposed building, in this case, it said it's to be located within 1 foot of a setback line, then a boundary survey with accompanying plat, blah, blah, blah.
We should make that consistent with the other one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that just
unclear to
should
me
be-
whether a fence. I'm looking at 4 on page 3.
Fortress, yes.
It requires a plat or survey with respect to any proposed improvements. Improvements was my way of thinking big fences and walls. Later, the term structure is used, which may or may not include fences and walls. But the point is that a full-blown boundary survey can cost far more than the cost of the fence. And the owners require that.
Yeah, or I can follow up, just to clarify that with the town attorney in case there's language that I'm not drawing from A to B. What we typically do when someone is putting in a fence, we verify that the proposed location of the fence, we look at the right-of-way maps to make sure that the fence is not going into a town right-of-way. And
Or
what
their
the,
neighbor's property.
well, we can't verify.
Yeah.
So what we put in the letter is, we verified that basically there's no encroachment into town right-of-way. We make no representation, basically it's incumbent upon the resident to verify that they're not putting their fence onto someone else's property. We
Okay.
can't tell them that.
That makes sense.
But I think, Chris, the issue you're raising is a good one. I can basically, the intent was not to really have someone have to go out and get an expensive survey for a fence. I think it was more, but there really aren't setbacks per se that apply to a fence, but I'd like to have the opportunity to verify that that's not an issue.
The next section says the town permit shall be valid for the same period of time as a Montgomery County permit. But then it goes on to say that it must be commenced within so much time or it will be void. Is that the same as the county?
I
standard?
believe it is.
Well, then it's redundant. If it's different than the county standard, it may be one we want to apply, but we create confusion by saying that the permit shall be valued for the same period of time.
I suspect, and I will confirm this with the town attorney, that typically you're just wanting to let people know that if action isn't taken on a permit, basically, since there's 2 permits, that one may be voided. We can't represent what's going to happen to the county permit, but we should certainly be telling people what's going to happen with the one we issue. But I can look into that. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about the county permits and their policies and procedures.
What has been our experience in recent instances? I know, for example, that the construction of the 2 bungalows, or the modification of the 2 bungalows on Strathmore took far longer than a year. The Simon's Pool. was
That's
pretty
gone on a
close.
while. Yeah.
Do we really want to provide such tight limits?
I think the underlying principle, and once again, that was language added by Ron, not by me. I think is just that you don't want to be tracking permits and their validity. So you're kind of issuing them with the expectation that someone would commence work.
We say, somehow that it must commence within 12 months after the permit is issued, unless there is a mutually agreed upon extension. In other words,
Well, the extension is contemplated in the next clause.
Right. I was gonna say, a year later, basically, they'd have to come and renew
I
the
think what
permit.
It does seem nice and elegant to kind of just keep it tied to the county if we're doing that for one portion.
I wonder if the survey is not even tied to the county, 'cause my recollection is they require the survey anyway.
That seems to be the case, at least for variances. They
Yeah, so if
they
you're doing
require
a-
some verification.
So if you're doing an addition, you need it for them regardless of whether we would ask for it. The same thing is, I guess, may not hurt to just let residents know about like the setbacks for accessory buildings, but for years we have used setback requirement for accessory buildings, because this is basically just the base for R90 zoning has been applied, because we don't have anything more restrictive in Garrett Park than that currently, but then the ones that are listed in here, to my knowledge, it's the same as the county, so I'm not sure. Like, can we even have an ordinance that says the same thing, or? You know,
We
if
can.
Should we?
Yeah, I think we can. George Martin actually recommended it, so he brought up the issue, so
Yeah.
I put great stock in his opinion, so.
So you're recommending to have the same language as the county for the accessory?
But this is just repeating, well, the accessories, it's repeating the county, like the 5 foot from the side or the back, that's the county
Yeah,
regulation.
but I don't think it has the rear line. Personally, I don't think we need.
Yeah. I mean, it might be that George is just recommending it just so the homeowners have a shortcut to know what it is.
That-
Usually we've just been telling people that that's what it is, and
Yeah.
it's clear in R9.
Where did on page 3, number 4 platter survey, where did the margin of error of 1/10 of 1 foot come from?
That came from Ron Bolt. I believe he pulled that from another code for one of, I don't think where he pulled it from, I don't believe he represents them. I think that's a different attorney.
I think that was pretty common.
1/10 of,
Topic. Yeah.
okay,
'Cause
well,
they'll do feet, they'll say like 9.7 feet. You shouldn't be that far off of that.
If I can circle back around to Jerry's question about the pools and someone on a corner lot. She had a concern about that, and I wasn't sure kind of where the group fell on that issue, so we know what to do with that.
I have no problem with the setback part. I just think it's maybe a little unfair to essentially define it such that if you live in a corner lot, you couldn't install a pool you could on any other lot.
Point of information, I seem to recall a while back, there was discussion of permitting a homeowner on a top corner lot to elect which side would be the front. So
Well, the
we
way
could-
this is written, it says very explicitly, a swimming pool must not be located in a front yard. Corner lots have 2 front yards.
Okay, so that proposal never made it through. So the setback for a corner lot is still 30 feet on both sides.
So we did have a clarification with side streets, but that is, it goes to a definition, I think, that's backed by the county, that there are no other, on whatever that street is, there are no other houses facing it. So I think one of the few examples, if not the only one we have in town, is Oxford, the block here, because all the houses have, they have frontages on the other side street. There's no other lot except for those ones that face the 2 streets. I know it's an odd way to
They're not
describe
gonna
it,
put
but,
swimming
yeah,
pools there anyway.
that met the definition of a side street from the county's definition, where everything else was a main street.
Okay, for most corner lots, then it's still 30 feet on both sides.
Yes, yeah, except for those 4
Okay,
lots over there. But there's a pool next to me that's on the corner lot. Which
Right. By the
Can almost
pool,
consider it to be a parking lot with a pool in it, but it's
across from the pool.
there.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't know, I guess that, if, and that may have been what, is, I know George had a lot of concern about that one when that one was going through, but that one, the deck is right up against the property line, I think. The pool body is pretty close to the setback line too, so. So it might
Again,
be-
my concern is not adding the setback lines. I think that makes sense, but it seems a little unfair to essentially say that a corner lot could not have a pool, but any other lot could.
I would agree.
Where does it say that?
Especially unfair for people.
It's G on page 8G, swimming pools.
I mean, I think this probably would father existing.
Or-
pools, but-
But if you have to do any work on it that might possibly require a permit, can you do the work? Because they'll just,
So how do we circumvent that problem?
What corner, I guess, a corner lot could have a pool, it just has to fall outside of that, the two front setbacks.
Right, because every
It-
corner
it
lot has two
explicitly
setbacks.
says, a swimming pool must not be located in a front yard. Corner lots have 2 front yards.
They also have two 30-foot right-of-ways.
Right, but it says 2 front yards.
2 front yards.
Yeah, I guess.
And it's unlikely that there's room in side yard,
Right.
so that limits them to the backyard, which may not have enough room.
Yeah. And the side yard is like a whole different concern. Then, is there anything in here about the pool being behind the house? It's not, because the Simon's pool, that one, I think the county historic preservation made them, weren't they gonna make them?
Well, that's a separate.
Yeah.
And that's 2 lots. They have plenty of room.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
What I think it's on here is size lot.
Can we put that in parentheses and move on?
Yeah, maybe just ask it if you looked at it.
Yeah, we can look at that. I mean, what I'm hearing everyone say is you don't want to penalize someone who's on a corner lot from building a pool if they wish to. And
Right.
what I would suggest, unless if, certainly not trying to curtail a discussion, but I think given that there are some issues that you all have raised tonight, I would not suggest probably, I'm hesitant to almost bring it back for introduction. Would you all be open to just having it brought back just for discussion so you have an opportunity to look at this and to have some of these issues clarified?
A revised draft.
Yeah,
I would agree.
is everyone okay with that?
And the final,
And I will go very quickly. This is the night of code changes. You all back in October considered a variance request, and as I was sitting there listening to kind of the discussion with Ron Bolt, and also in just preparing the staff briefing materials, it struck me that there might be an opportunity to refine the associated section of the town code, which is chapter 4, section 403. In a discussion with Ron Bold, he agreed that there were some things that would be beneficial. So there is a proposed ordinance before you, just very quickly. Some of these things are sort of, I would say, administrative. Basically, we do have a requirement already in the code that there be a public hearing, that there be a written opinion for each application that would be publicized. The language in the proposed ordinance would require the town to provide notice of the hearing directly to the abutting and confronting property owners at least 15 days before the hearing, just to make sure that nearby neighbors don't overlook a listserv thing, that they would actually get a direct communication from the town. I know the mayor has expressed some concern about this as proposed. There would be a requirement to submit a boundary survey prepared by a licensed surveyor if a proposed building or addition is to be located within 2 feet of a setback line. There was some language that the town attorney noted that he thought could be confusing, and this ordinance would delete that language is in section 403C. Instead of non-conforming uses, it should be non-conforming structure. So uses would be clarified, deleted, and structure substituted. We do have a provision in the town code that the language suggests that there is no opportunity for someone to seek a variance, and the town attorney has advised that there at least needs to be a variance process that someone can pursue. So this is the section 403C 1.2.1 states that if a lot area is equal to or less than 8,600 square feet, then the net lot area to be covered by buildings, including accessory buildings, shall not exceed whichever is less. The town attorney advised that there at least needs to be the opportunity for a variance to be considered by the town council. For lots such as this, we have added language to this section that would incorporate a review standard on the part of the town council of exceptional or undue hardship in such situations. Another administrative requirement would basically be that essentially that if there is a variance, that a building permit would need to be obtained within 12 months. Similar to the building permit ordinance that you just discussed, any ordinance would be subject to review by the county council under the same parameters. But this is a much shorter ordinance, thankfully, than the one you just had to talk about. So I wanted to see what questions you all might have about this.
All right, given the hour and the likelihood that we are not going to really be introducing this, I suggest we just have some discussion aimed at identifying any areas on which we need more information or clarification. And I would start by stating my long-held belief that we should establish a deadline by which an application for a variance can be filed. And it should be at least 20 days before the hearing date, the next available hearing date at which they would want to be considered. This, as it's drafted, implies that they can come in 16 days before. The town would get out letters the next day. The people would really have essentially only 2 weeks' notice. We have also, as a matter of practice, but not a requirement, posted properties so that people not immediately adjacent, but who are simply passing by, would also have notice of variance. We do it with demolitions as well. I believe we should change we should insert a requirement for an application at least 20 days before hearing, and insert a requirement upon ourselves that a property be posted for at least 15 days.
Posted just mean public notice given.
I don't think you-
Yeah, it's a sign.
Okay.
It's a sign like you get a
The sign
permit.
in front of what we
Yeah.
see under construction permits, yeah.
I wonder if 20 days is even enough, because if you have a long holiday weekend, because this is not business days, it's calendar days, 3 of those days would be. But maybe 25 days, to make sure that the town staff has enough time to process, make the notice. I think it's great that we're adding the notice to the neighbors.
Well, let's see, I think the requirement for notice to abutting neighbors is already in our practice, but it's not a requirement.
It didn't happen at the last variance.
It didn't?
Yeah, I asked about it, and that's why this came about.
Ah, okay. Perfect. So, and looking now on page 3, more or less in the middle, C, B, as in Baker, recites the standard, which includes peculiar or unusual practical difficulties, as well as exceptional or undue hardship. And that's the standard we've had, and it's proposed to remain. However, in D, as in David, we condition that provision on only a showing of exceptional or undue hardship. I believe that should be expanded to include peculiar or unusual practical difficulties, or an explanation of why we need only the one of the two. And they are in the disjunctive. It's or, which is usually overlooked. People usually just cite the hardship provision. Administrative requirements. The effective date of any decision shall be the date of the council. The council approves of written decision that would typically be at the earliest, the next regular council meeting date. And in the case of a variance heard in July, it might not be until September. I wonder if we want to impose a little different standard there.
The town attorney has opined that once the council at the meeting, the council itself is not making the decision, it's directing the town attorney to draft an opinion putting into place. So they're not approving the variance, they're directing the town attorney to basically prepare sort of the findings of fact letter, if you will. He has approved in the past, and we have done so, that draft order, if you will, is circulated on email, and people, members of the town council have provided comments. So it actually, that written opinion has been essentially reviewed and comments provided by the town council over email. And when we are clear that it represents the decision of the town council at the meeting, then it is issued. So it does not come back to you, and has not, at least during my tenure, at a town council meeting. So it's whatever date that you all stop responding to comments and have essentially okayed the draft, and that becomes the effective date.
All right. So query then whether the language should be changed to the date the council issues its written opinion instead of approves.
Okay.
That, when I say query, I mean ask if that would meet, if Ron believes that still meet the
Okay.
requirement.
On the very beginning of this, on the third whereas, partially down, there's a land zone for single-family residential, which I assume we want to just make it zone for residential
Yeah.
or something.
Follow up with him on that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, where is that from?
So it's page 1, the third whereas,
Oh,
almost towards the bottom. It says, begins with on land zone
Yeah.
for.
yeah,
Well, isn't that because that's what the Maryland code says?
that's what it says now.
Yeah, I mean, if it's referring to.
I think we just need to flag that and hope we can change it if we get an amendment.
Okay, well, we'll point it out, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, look, it would be nice if that changes.
you're right. But yeah, you're right.
Have we, speaking of that, have we heard anything from the attorneys about the stormwater management letter?
I ran with the feedback from the two of you I've heard from about that. I sent them back the input, I believe it was right before the Christmas holiday. I checked in with them last week on the status of that. Obviously there were the holidays, and then one of the primary attorney who's doing the drafting was stuck in depositions. So I am going to ask them to send me another draft before it goes to the county.
So we haven't submitted it yet.
It has not.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question on page 4
Okay.
under exemptions. And it lists 2. And so the second one, I'm not sure, but the way I seem to read it, it's obsolete because we're well past any.
Yeah, I can check with Ron and see if that needs to stay.
I mean, my house was built in 1964, but I don't think I'm going to be able to use its building permit, or maybe I am. I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I'll check with him. That's a good point. Thank you.
There's something else that say, one of the other things we looked at tonight specifies an expiration date for building permit.
Oh, yeah, it also violate the expiration date, wouldn't it?
Further comments on this proposal? So we'll just get responses to the issues we've raised and consider next. Attainable housing strategies, at least 3 elected officials have come out in opposition. I think the general, and that was one that would permit duplexes, quadplexes within single-family zones. I think, however, the issue will be with us so that the proposed amendment to the state enabling statute that is specifically aimed at avoiding problems that might come about with this, problems in our ability to administer our own setbacks that are slightly more stringent than the county, for example. I believe it's still worth pursuing that because this issue will realize at some point. And we want to make sure that we can apply our more stringent standards on setbacks, FAR, and density, irrespective of the nature of the structure, whether it's single family or multiplex. In that respect, there's lobbying going on at both places, the county and the state. We have been asked if we want to join, meaning help pay for one lobbyist. I'm going to supply that information to Jerry Lee, who will relay it to you, and you can discuss it amongst yourselves. Owing to some prior dealings with the individual involved, I will recuse myself from any discussion or determination on that, having to do with hiring a lobbyist or going in with other municipalities who have hired the lobbyists.
Can you tell us how many others? I mean, in other words, what share of the lobbies?
I don't know. I'll very
We'll
well,
pass that along.
she'll pursue that. Yeah.
We don't have that many.
Nor do we know whether it's pro rata. Okay. Phil, archives committee?
I'll make it pretty short. She supported John Andre's research on the Chisholm property, or the archives did, and then in turn generated a Bugle article. So that's when I had talked previously about somebody coming in and asking for a lot of time to research something that on Chisholm, that's what it was about. It wasn't somebody looking for a brownfield, from as near as we can tell. It was more along just trying to do historical paper. And Sonia completed the reconciliation of the town council meetings from 1991 to 2020, and is also working on cleaning up the oral history transcribing. And so she gave Joe May 6 files to transcribe. And she spent some money buying some cleaning supplies. So that is it for me. And we already discussed the other thing. I forgot we already discussed the office bit.
Chris, I forgot to, in my report, did you want me to verify, see if everyone's available on the date for the budget work session?
Sounds as though, I shouldn't say this out loud, tempt fate, we might be able to begin as part of the regular February meeting, a very generalized high-level discussion of priorities in connection with the FY26 budget. But we will definitely need a work session for purposes of more detailed facts and figures. On a couple of occasions, your October 23 retreat and my little discussion last June, we discussed, or the council discussed, the notion of preemptorily holding the second Monday of each month for a potential work session or other meeting, which would be canceled if there were nothing necessary. I would like to again revisit that, but if it's not possible,
You mean not the first, not the second Monday, which is.
I'm sorry, the fourth Monday for a second meeting. Or work session, as the case may be. So that would be the 24th of February. And on the off chance that there was still work to do, I would like to ask you to hold the 24th of March. If that's not possible, then Barbara can do a Google poll or something, and we will ad hoc it. But honestly, that's
February 24th.
24th,
Okay.
the fourth Monday.
Yeah, and that's generally the week that you all have met to have a kind of a pre-budget development work session. It's always been like the last week of February, more or less.
Okay. Is that an indication that everyone's available then?
Yes. I like that better than doing the doodle poll.
Okay,
Currently, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
good. Any other business? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motioned.
All in favor?